Chapter 29. The vast land was sleeping in the darkness, and there was no sound. The silence seemed to be mourning for the souls that had passed away on this land. The stars were hanging upside down, and shooting stars crossed half of the purplish-red sky, as if symbolizing the names that had shone in the long river of history. Breton stood silently in the cold night wind, and one order after another came from his mouth. The guards galloped through the ruins of the green village, exterminating the remaining enemies. All the undead had to be purified. Everything. The young captain felt that this was the only way to make himself feel better. He looked at the time, and he still had half an hour. Zeto looked at this scene from afar, and he shook the glass flask in his hand, and touched the young man beside him. Are you called Irene? Irene was slightly startled. My name is Zeto, do you want some? He raised the flat flask, pure clear lake fire wine, Ryan, and I found it in a wine cellar. Unfortunately, I don't know if I can still drink it after this war. He paused for a moment. You know, I used to have a dream. I wanted to be the best scout. But now I'm regretting it. Irene felt that this person was very strange, but she was a little interested in why he regretted it. A person wouldn't regret for no reason, right? Why? She asked. My biggest goal was to discover the enemy, because discovering the enemy was my value. But now what I want to do most is to hide the villagers. At least they won't be killed. But you know, I can't do anything, it's not your fault. I'm a soldier. Zeto took a sip of the wine. When I saw that girl crying, I wished I could die on the battlefield like Corfinto. But I'm still alive, and I can't escape. The young man was silent, and for some reason, he subconsciously thought of Brando. He had an illusion that the young man who led them out of trouble could also lead them out of the shadows this time. Perhaps his premonition was true, and all the difficulties would be solved. Hopefully. He thought. Brando and Freya sat together. To be honest, Brando felt that he was not good at comforting people. He felt that it would have been better if someone else was here, but that damned Breton actually left with a sour face. Irene also stayed far away and refused to come over. Hey, isn't that your captain? Fortunately, Freya quickly adjusted her emotions, but she kept staring in a certain direction. Her usually bright eyes were now filled with loneliness. Brando recognized that kind of desolation. He had seen the same kind of gaze on the Valkyrie, a gaze that flowed with quiet sadness, as if it would never disappear. However, he suddenly felt that it was a pity. Compared to her, he preferred the innocent, soft-hearted, and somewhat persistent Freya, the Freya who could get angry over small things. But how was he supposed to open his mouth? He hesitated for a long time, but when the words reached his mouth, they seemed pale and powerless. He had prepared several lines, but none of them were suitable. Just as he was having a headache, the girl spoke first. Mr. Brando, she called out. Tell me, why is there a war? He really did not seriously think about this question. In the game, the large guilds would go to war because of the distribution of benefits, reputation, and even face. Countries would fight for benefits, sovereignty, and territory. The flames of war would spread across the land at any time. In the past, he might have answered that it was because humans were creatures that were always controlled by their desires. They yearned to conquer and plunder, and thus were always fighting against each other. But after experiencing everything today, especially Freya's weak cry, it was forever imprinted in his heart, and could not be erased. He suddenly realized that this answer was laughable, because no one could surpass their own race. Humans were both weak and strong. War will happen, and we can only choose to accept it. We were born in a very bad era, and we cannot choose our era. But we can try to change it. Brando answered. As he said that, he suddenly felt a sense of relief because of his own words. Perhaps we can't change anything, but at least we fought together with many others to achieve it. Such memories are already precious enough. He recalled the days when he fought for Erwin in the game. Many friends, many like-minded companions, many vows, even though they all left in the end, at least he had countless memories, and never once regretted his loss. Those were memories that belonged to Erwin. He couldn't forget them for a very long time. The girl fell silent. Freya. You must love them very much. Yes. The girl answered, after my father passed away, Auntie Sil had always taken care of me, they were proud of me. But I'm the same, I love them more than anything. But I'm very curious, why did the heavens choose you? Brando asked. Freya, if one day you become the protector of this land, have you ever thought about it? How is that possible, Mr. Brando? Are you secretly laughing at me? The girl was a bit angry, but her voice became softer. I want to be a good leader, but my strength is only so much, so little. I only want to fulfill my responsibility, I can't do it if it's too far away. No, not only did you do it, you did it very well. Freya, you will be Erwin's last hero, and also the one that people will miss the most. Humble, serious, strong, kind, the heavens gave you ordinary talents, but also gave you the best qualities and unique experiences. Brando turned the black sandalwood gargoyle statue over and over in his hand, staring into the distance inside. Freya, I don't know how far you'll go in the future, but I want you to remember one thing. Do you know the word companions? No matter how far you go, there will always be many people to accompany you. You will never be alone. Freya was startled, and suddenly her eyes were filled with sorrow. She thought of the Roman, Petit Finus, Irene and Mackie, and everyone in the 3rd Militia Unit. Of course, there was also Aunt Sil. She wiped the corner of her eyes and looked up at the sky. The night was divided into two by a red curtain. The green village was burning, and the raging flames in the darkness seemed to indicate a greater catastrophe. Thank you, she replied softly. Shameless Brando. Our hero choked. But when he turned around, Freya's eyes were bright, like the stars in the night sky. At that moment, Brando suddenly felt that his existence was valuable. At least history was different now, wasn't it? Breton quickly got what he wanted, food and medicine. Although the green village was almost completely destroyed, it was not difficult to find these things. The undead did not need food or medicine, and these things were just casually piled up there. Moreover, they had Brando with them. Even though Butchie, Verbin, and Green Village were all under the jurisdiction of the Butchie garrison, the youths who were familiar with the garrison could not compare to Brendel. Brando easily found the secret cellars of the two squires' manors with his memories. Other than food and medicine, there were also other materials, such as pig iron, copper, and even gold and silver. But they could not bring the extra things, so they could only seal the cellars as they were. Perhaps they could still be used in the future. Of course, it was not Brando's habit to return empty-handed, especially as a player. The owners of these manors died in the war, and they did not have any descendants. Brando knew that these manors were later burned down by the undead of Madara. Those secret cellars later became the hottest thing for players, and as long as they found one, they could make a small fortune. This was why he was so familiar with the location of these cellars. Players were always creatures that did not wake up early if there was no profit. But he could not bring the big things, but he definitely could not let go of the magic equipment. Under everyone's surprised gaze, he opened a few secret compartments. Most of them were gold, silver, and jewels, but our protagonist did not care about those things. In the game, these were all wealth, but on the battlefield, they were worthless except for being a burden. The young vice-captain's face darkened, and he looked at him suspiciously. When did this guy learn to be a burglar? But with his personality, he would not degrade himself, right? At this time, Brando took out a set of female half-body armor. This was a set of retro armor. The bright surface was decorated with complicated brass ornaments, and the black and gold patterns showed that it was a work of art in the style of the year of the return of glory. But before everyone could look away from this beautiful armor, Brando took out another set of armor from nowhere. Then he waved to Freya. "Freya, come here." Our future Valkyrie was slightly startled. "Try on this set of armor." Wait, Breton could not help but sneer. "Brando, you can't be thinking of letting Freya wear that set of armor, right? Not all armors are meant to be used in actual combat, do you understand?" Brando was too lazy to pay attention to him. He took the armor and was about to put it on Freya. But the girl blushed, swayed her ponytail, and took the armor and said, I'll do it myself." He was stunned. In the game, he did not pay much attention to this. He and his female knight and warrior companions helped each other put on their armor, but he forgot that this was reality. "What are you thinking?" Breton saw Freya run to the pile of wood and could not help but ask. "What?" "That is a work of art, it's too heavy. You can't be thinking of letting Freya wear it in battle, right? Besides, have you militia learned how to fight in armor? Too heavy." This was the first time Brando heard of this. He could not help but look back at the young vice-captain, wondering if his brain had been flooded with water. He did not explain further and waved for Freya to come over, then helped her put on the armor. Then he asked, "How does it feel?" "It's a bit heavy, it's not very flexible." The youths behind Breton snickered. How could such an obvious piece of armor not be heavy? Of course, most of these snickers were kind, but there were also some who were mocking him. Brando ignored them and said to the armor, "Taz." This word was an ancient word, meaning wind. The armor was instantly covered by a layer of green light, and with a whoosh, it floated up from Freya's body and tightly protected her body. The girl was slightly startled and shouted in surprise, "This?" Brando turned back. "The Wind Empress armor is infused with the wind element, and someone actually said that it's too heavy. Presumably, the elven craftsman who designed this armor would not rest in peace even if he died, right?" Breton's face was as gloomy as water, while the young knight behind him was speechless. Chapter 30. As Breton brought the food and medicine back to Brando's acquaintance, the veteran Martin, or rather, the current Bucci garrison Captain Martin's base in the Belder Forest, the return of the 3rd Militia Unit caused a commotion in the valley. Mackie, Ike, Irene, Bertha, Petit Finus, and the Niberto brothers were all the eldest sons or daughters of their respective families in the village. Their families originally thought that they had perished in the battle that night, and had even prepared themselves to accept this reality. But now, they had returned alive and well. The refugees were in an uproar, although not all of them were Bucci residents. Some of them might have come from the Green Village or Verbin, but the enthusiastic atmosphere still affected everyone. After all, this was the first good news they had received in 2 days. A good omen could indicate that the coming days would be smooth sailing. Furthermore, with the food and medicine that came with it, the hungry and cold could eat warm meals, and the injured could be cared for. Everyone felt that hope was not far away, and even forgot about the embarrassing and tragic situation in the afternoon. Humans always yearned for a better life, and even if it was only a little better than now, they would still be satisfied. Some people said that humans were insatiable, and they were indeed insatiable, but they were also the easiest to satisfy. Martin ordered a bonfire to be lit. This veteran of the November War was brave and stubborn, and would definitely not submit to a few skeletons from Madara. He did not mind that Cabias and Rothko had discovered them, and according to his words, they could come at them as they pleased. Erwin was not a coward. With so many people who had not undergone military training, it was impossible to hide, so he might as well be generous. On the other hand, the suddenly lonely Freya was suddenly treated like a hero. At first, Brando was worried that she would be reminded of the past, but he quickly discovered that it was unnecessary. Freya, it's all thanks to you guys. Freya, don't be sad, you still have us. Everyone in the village will support you, you're a strong and good girl, everyone knows that. Freya, are you hurt? Come, let Auntie Akasha take a look, why are you so careless? A plump middle-aged woman parted the crowd. Although she had the rough and loud voice of a country bumpkin, she could not hide the concern on her face. She parted the fringe in front of Freya's forehead and wiped her face. She took a step back and looked at the girl carefully. Auntie Akasha, I'm fine. Really? If you have anything to say, don't keep it to yourself. Really, thank you everyone. Freya looked at everyone around her, a layer of fog inadvertently blocked her vision. In fact, these people had not had a good time in the past 2 days. Every one of them was frightened, and their eyes were bloodshot. But right now, they were showing the most sincere kinship between people. Brendel watched this scene from afar and felt an inexplicable warmth in his heart. The warm bonfire, the connection between people, and the aroma of food in the air seemed to dispel the darkness and coldness of the mountain. Even if it was only for a moment, it was enough to make people sigh with emotion. What a wonderful scene. The relationship between people should be so simple. Brando leaned against a white craggy rock and looked up at the stars in the sky. One by one, they were like diamonds sprinkled on a dark purple curtain. Why don't you go over? He saw a Roman sitting at a higher place, her hands holding her bag on her leather skirt, a pair of round leather shoes swinging back and forth in the air. They don't like me. Why? Auntie and I are strange people in their eyes, and no ordinary girl wants to be a merchant. So it's normal that they don't like them. You know that too. Brando said in his heart, but he suddenly realized that he had no impression of Roman's auntie, because that woman was always out, here one day, there the next. She would only come back occasionally and bring some strange things that Roman liked. Perhaps it was because of her independent upbringing that this future merchant lady had such a unique personality. Can you tell me about your parents? I don't think you've told me about them before. I've never seen them, for as long as I can remember, my auntie has been by my side. Auntie said, little Roman, when you grow up, you have to repay auntie. Romaine giggled, reflecting the moonlight, her eyes were bright and clear. Brando was stunned. After listening to her, he calmed down. So that's why you want to be a merchant? Yes. What a strange way of thinking. It's okay. The two of them chatted for a while before Brando saw Freya come over. That young girl appeared to be pure, simple, and approachable in front of everyone, but once she changed back to being the captain of Butchie's 3rd militia unit, she had a faint sense of responsibility like a future Valkyrie. She promised to bring Brando to meet Captain Martin of Butchie's garrison, although she didn't know what this young man wanted to do. But just like Irene, she had a blind trust in him, believing that as long as it was this young man, he would definitely have a way to get everyone out of this predicament. Freya didn't want to rely on anyone, she was just curious. And Brando's plan was like this. Now that he had coincidentally met up with Butchie's garrison and the refugees, and he also knew what kind of failure Captain Martin would encounter, then standing at this point in history, of course he had to do something. Indeed, Brando's first thought was to protect himself, but a person couldn't live alone in this world. If he did that, how would he face the Roman, how would he face Mackie and Petit Finus, how would he face Freya? What's more, the future Valkyrie's helpless cries had deeply moved him. Who would have so many misgivings in one life? Moreover, he had lived 2 lives, he just wanted to have no regrets. After thinking through this point, Brando felt that the road in front of him had opened up. The Roman naturally wouldn't leave his side. The 3 of them passed through the valley, passing through groups of 2s and 3s, and finally found the old man beside a campfire at the end of the valley. Coincidentally, or perhaps as expected, Breton was also there. But Brando didn't care about this guy, Instead, his gaze fell on the veteran of the November War. Martin. According to the time in the game, Brando suddenly remembered that he hadn't seen this old man for almost 30 years, the time ratio was 8:1. In the game, Martin's later years were extremely unsatisfactory, but he still died of old age. His only fortune was that he didn't personally witness Erwin's defeat, and also gained the friendship of many players. This NPC had an extremely high prestige among the players, because he taught many skills such as stealth, scouting, and swordsmanship. Most importantly, he also taught the first advanced warrior skill, Battle Cry of Courage. The old man didn't look much different from Brando's memory, he didn't even look that old, but the determination on his face was even stronger. Brando had interacted with this veteran for a period of time, so he knew his temperament. He knew that this was an extremely determined and fearless soldier with a fiery temper. Therefore, any euphemism wouldn't work in front of him, so he might as well be straightforward and directly state his intentions. Maybe he could win some goodwill. But when he opened his mouth, he still felt a little apprehensive. Who knew if the character of this world was the same as the character in the game? Although he thought that it should be the same, he felt that it was a little inconceivable. After listening to his statement, Martin's eyebrows moved. Of course, it was a frown. But as expected, the first to raise an objection was the young vice-captain of the guards. Breton. You mean that we will fail, what's the reason? Brando's gaze stopped on Martin, and he heard the old man say, Young man, I am very grateful that you want to join us and do your best for the kingdom. But you don't seem to have much hope for the upcoming battle. I would also like to hear. Brando didn't panic, he was most worried that this hot-tempered old man wouldn't give him a chance to speak. As long as he opened his mouth, as someone who was familiar with the development of history, he was confident that he could convince the old man. Actually, I only have one question. Do you know how many undead soldiers of Madara are blocking your path? The few young men from the garrison force who were sitting there were all silent. Martin also didn't speak, but Breton answered after he saw Martin's eyes. From the battle in the afternoon, it should be the same undead army that started to bite us. Later on, another undead army joined in, and I took note of their flags. There should be at least 2 different commanders. Unfortunately, I don't know the specific organization of Madara. Our protagonist looked at this guy in surprise. He couldn't tell that this guy actually had some real ability. Unlike his previous life's experience, Breton only needed to observe the chaotic battlefield for a bit to come to this conclusion. It was quite amazing. But this didn't make Brando think highly of him, because unfortunately, Brando happened to be the one who knew more than him. You don't know much about Madara. It's not strange for you to come to the wrong conclusion, he said with assurance. This is a country that has never been truly unified. Before the era of runes and swords, a group of exiled dark magi came here and became the first lord of this area, and for a long time, this place was a paradise for bandits and undead wanderers. Why are you saying all this? Listen to him, Breton, don't be impatient. Brando smiled. He knew that he could attract Martin's attention. An old soldier was an old soldier. No matter how bad his temper was, he could always grasp some crucial information. But at the same time, it is an extremely aggressive country. Those lords who live in the darkness are constantly fighting each other, and at any time, they would plunder from the north, south, or any direction. Erwin, Cruz, Oser, and even the Banlin area have suffered greatly. Years of war have allowed the Lords of the Darkness to have battle-hardened troops. Although their organization is extremely chaotic, their fighting strength is not to be underestimated. Therefore, when you see 2 different units with different designations, their scale may also be vastly different. So, can you describe to me the details of your battles? Maybe I can provide you with some information. Brando. Breton finally couldn't help but stand up. He angrily rebuked, You're lying. How could you know about Madara's situation? As far as I know, you dash. He wanted to say something, but was stopped by the young man's stern gaze. Breton was stunned for a moment. He couldn't believe that he was shocked speechless by Brendel's gaze. The Brando of the past wasn't so strong, he was just a young boy with some talent. "Listen, Breton, I'm not here to argue with you." Brando replied word by word, "I don't expect you to understand what kind of critical situation this is, but I just want you to know that you have to be responsible for your actions." Breton was speechless, and then he exploded in anger. "Tell him what we encountered, Breton." Martin opened his mouth, and the old soldier's brows were deeply furrowed. Note, Act 18, S. Taz in Elven language. P.S. The last few chapters have been very good. I don't know if everyone has the same feeling as me. Also, I would like to thank my readers for their support in recommending my books. I appreciate it. Chapter 31. Breton sat down and shot a glance at Brando. In his heart, he was certain that this guy was lying. He and Brando were part of the same batch of militia in Ankees. Although they had not met during their time in Brags, they had a rough understanding of each other's experiences. As the son of a miller, even if his grandfather was a knight in the November War, and his mother had a bit of noble blood, what extraordinary experiences could he have had? Afterwards, he was transferred to the garrison, and it was said that this kid was going to take over his father's position. But for some reason, he actually came to Butchie and stayed there for a year. It was obvious that this year did not allow him to gain much knowledge, but if this kid wanted to lie, he would have to consider whether he could fool Martin. Breton turned his head to look at his captain. Although his old captain had a bad temper and was stubborn, he was very astute. He could easily expose a lie with a few words. After all, soldiers who could survive the November War from beginning to end were not simple people. After Breton sat down, another young guard felt that the atmosphere was a little awkward, so he added on to Breton's previous words. What he said was the details of the encounter during the day until the afternoon. The people around him nodded in agreement or added a few words. In the group, only Breton and the old captain remained silent. Brando knew that Martin had a bad temper, and almost scolded him when he opened his mouth. But at the crucial moment, he was able to calm down. This was the quality of a veteran, but his silver-gray eyebrows occasionally moved slightly, showing the anxiety in his heart. As for Breton, he had made up his mind to watch from the sidelines. After hearing their description, Brando knew who they had encountered. The army that had followed them from Butchie should be the necromancer Rothko. In the game, Rothko was an extremely talented necromancer. This nickname was given to him by the players. His innate skill was necromancy. Undead that were summoned were easier to turn into necromancers. Thus, his army had a special characteristic: they replenished their troops quickly. Although they did not have strong offensive capabilities, they were patient and cunning. They were good at using cannon fodder to wear down the enemy and polish their morale. At this time, Rothko should still be an apprentice necromancer. Brando guessed that his position in Targus' attack order would not be higher than the position of a squadron leader. In fact, his guess was not far from the truth, but he would never have thought that he had already met the other party from afar, on the night they escaped from Butchie. As for the other unit, there was no need for him to guess. In history, the unit that razed the Green Village to the ground was Cabia's. This skeleton wasn't famous in Madara's history, but he was a veteran. At this time, he should have been one of Targus' generals. This meant that Rothko's squadron should have more than 200 soldiers, and there should be at least 20 liches. As Cabia's main force, it should have at least a fifth of Tarkus's left-wing forces. Such a large force would not only consist of skeletons, but also black samurai and pale knight. Fortunately, the undead army had to seal off several paths in the forest, so their forces couldn't be concentrated in one place. Today, the refugees should have encountered half of Rothko's company and one of Cabia's company. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to escape so easily. Of course, it was impossible for Brando to go into such detail, or else the source of the information would be problematic. The previous information could be attributed to legends, anecdotes, or even stories, but it was impossible for him to know the enemy's forces so clearly. Being a prophet was also a skill. He decided to go back to the previous topic. He paused and said, "I don't know if you have heard of Anse, but it is the headquarters of the necromancers. In fact, Madara is divided into 3 factions. One is the vampires, and the other is the necromancers. I won't explain these 2 factions, but you should have heard of their legends. The remaining faction is also a faction that holds considerable power. We call them the Dark Lords. When they were alive, they were robbers, bandits, Knight of the Templar who committed crimes, nobles who were expelled from the human world, or undead wanderers. They believe in the Dark Codex, and are the traditional rulers of Madara." "It's novel, but it's just a story," a guard replied. "No, you imagine that when one person unifies these 3 factions, Madara will rise from the darkness. Coincidentally, they have a prophecy about this. But you said before that this country has never been truly unified." "In the past, yes, but this opportunity is now in front of us." "But what does that have to do with us?" "Of course, have you heard of the legend of the Mercury Staff?" Brando suddenly changed the subject. "The Mercury Staff in the prophecy, the one that is said to unify the dark world if someone obtains it?" one of the guards asked. Brando nodded. "Its full name is Loki's Mercury Staff. Let me tell you who Loki was. He was a genius necromancer, and in his time, he almost completed the great task of unifying Madara. But it was all in vain, and then the whereabouts of the staff became a mystery, leaving only a legend that when someone obtains it, they will become the king of the dark world again. But since this spring, someone has seen the Mercury Staff appear in Anse's place." "Wait," Breton's expression changed. "The rumor from a few months ago is true." "A few months ago?" "Ah, I remember now. It seems that a merchant brought news from there, saying that someone with a strange staff opened some kind of door." "The Door of Sighs," Brando added, "that's Loki's treasury, where his throne is." The old guard captain frowned deeply. "Boy, although I don't understand the intrigue between those big shots, you're saying that there's a big change in Madara. That's wonderful, at least this means that Madara came prepared this time. Although I don't know what their goal is, at least it won't be a small-scale plunder and invasion, right? It sounds ridiculous, but it's not impossible." He placed his calloused hand on his knee, which was very close to his sword. "Breton, do you know this young man?" Breton was stunned. He knew that if he voiced his suspicions, although the captain wouldn't immediately stab him with his sword, he would at least capture him and make it impossible for him to explain. He couldn't help but glare at Brando, not hiding the ridicule in his eyes. But after thinking about it, he didn't choose to do so. "I know him, and I also think that he's lying. But my rationality tells me that this person has no reason to deceive us. What if he's already been bribed by Madara?" Martin asked again. "It's not that I haven't considered it, but considering his experience with Freya and the others, if Madara's commander can plan so far ahead, then I don't think I lost unjustly." "Very good, Breton." Martin patted his vice-captain's shoulder. "Ha!" It wasn't just Martin, even Brando couldn't help but glance at this young vice-captain. It seemed like this guy wasn't completely useless. Of course, he wouldn't be able to change his impression of him, and he was too narrow-minded, so he wouldn't be able to achieve anything. He used his god's eye view to judge Breton. Of course, if Breton knew what Brando was thinking right now, he would definitely regret his words of fairness. But even if Breton denied or slandered him, it wouldn't matter. Brando had his own ways to convince Martin. As someone who could foresee the future, he was already standing on a higher level. It was just that it would take a lot of effort to convince him, and he might even leave behind something that could be used against him. "Alright, let's get back to the main topic." Martin opened his mouth. "Kid, so you think that Madara's target is Fortress Reden?" In the Grimoires region, Erwin can only rely on Fortress Vermeer. And Fortress Reden protects the flank of this defensive line, so Madara's target can only be Fortress Reden. Brando nodded. Martin couldn't help but rub his nose and scold. Since Madara has already made up his mind, then the ones that caught us before shouldn't be small fries, right? Damn it, why do we have to bear a bunch of bad luck? I don't know the specifics, Brando said in his heart. But from your description, the ones that followed us before should be an undead army led by a necromancer. And the ones that came after them should be the Dark Lord's army. The necromancer's army uses liches as their base unit, so it's very easy to distinguish. From your description, it should be half a squadron. The Dark Lord's army is more chaotic, but from the soldiers that the Green Village reserved, there should be at least 2 squadrons. That's about right. Martin nodded. What he didn't know was that Brando had already reduced the number by half. But even so, everyone couldn't help but feel anxious. Against such a large undead army, how could they succeed with only 30 guards and a group of weak women and children? The old captain also sighed. All right, Brando. Since you're here to tell us this, can I assume that you already have an idea in mind? I don't mind telling you that if the situation is as you said, I don't have the confidence to bring these people out. Freya let out a low gasp when she heard this. But Brando nodded. I have an idea. Everyone's gaze was focused on him. Even Breton, who didn't trust him, couldn't help but be shocked. Brendel sucked in a breath of air nervously. In the end, he had just gained some confidence, and this kind of attention still made him feel a little pressured. He suddenly realized that every word he was about to say could affect the life and death of many people. Should he be more cautious? He couldn't help but remind himself to calm down and not to forget anything. Everyone can go north and cross the River of Daggers. He answered. River of Daggers. That place, why? Brendel hesitated for a moment. How can I explain why the White Knight, Abdin and Corpse Ghoul Wadon were 2 days late in coming to surround this place? P.S. Sorry, it's even later. The next chapter might be a little late too. Chapter 32. Brando's mind raced. It would be great if he had some sort of scouting ability. For example, Eagle Eye, Omen, Deadman's Vision, or Detection. But when he thought of scouting, he suddenly thought of a possibility. That's right, it's that. He couldn't help but clench his fists and loosen them to calm himself down. Because the River of Daggers is practically undefended, and there's only a squad of undead stationed there. Why wouldn't I break through in that direction? Everyone's first reaction was almost the same. What, is that true? How is that possible? How do you know? Brando raised his hand to silence everyone. Of course I know. Breton, do you remember the half-broken statue you found in the Green Village? That's the one that looks like a demon, heavy and heavy. Breton suddenly came to a realization. Zeta and Ryan had found the item under the collapsed Kalados shrine. They had heard that they had discovered traces of a knight nearby, so they had searched the area and found the item. Brando took out an ebony statue from his pocket. That's called a gargoyle, I'm sure you've heard of it. It's one of Bugha's basic combat units, and the wizards control it through this thing. He placed it on his open palm so that everyone could see it clearly. Most of the young guards had participated in the operation in the Green Village, and they immediately recognized that this little thing was exactly the same as the statue. Wait, you're saying you can control that thing? Someone asked. But can it move? It has wings, can it fly? The scout called Zeta stared at Brando from the back and asked. Of course it can fly, and it's not any slower than a wyvern. You know our wyvern knight, right? Their position in Bugha is similar to that of a wyvern knight, and they're the best scouts on the battlefield. I use it to open up a path to avoid large groups of undead. Yesterday morning, I noticed that Madara's army in the north was in trouble. They had at least 3 squadrons stranded in Verbin, and they couldn't seal off the north bank of the river in time. Furthermore, due to the problems with their coordination, I believe that the 2 undead armies in front of us are still unaware of the mistake made by their comrades in the north. Unfortunately, when I was investigating further, the gargoyle was discovered by the troops stationed there. It was attacked and damaged. When I ordered it to return, it crashed in Green Village. After Brando said that, Freya suddenly reacted. So that's how it is. Brando, at that time, you said that you had personal matters to attend to. No wonder you could always lead us to avoid danger. No wonder you insisted on going to the Green Village even though you were seriously injured. You wanted to fix that thing. Why didn't you tell us? Just as Brando was about to explain, the future Valkyrie lowered her head. I'm sorry, Brando. I was wrong too. At that time, I was still angry with you, but I didn't know that you were thinking for everyone. Ha! Brando felt that he was a genius, to be able to come up with such a story in a hurry. However, to be able to make Freya connect the dots from the beginning to the end, it was hard to say whether he was too smart or Freya was too stupid. Seeing her apologetic expression, Brando suddenly felt a little embarrassed. However, after hearing Freya's words, the people who originally believed 80% of it were now completely convinced. Freya was the best militia in this batch, and Martin had a good impression of her. Furthermore, she was from Butchie, so she couldn't possibly lie to them, right? Even Breton couldn't help but rub his eyebrows and ask, can that thing move again? It's hard to say, but I'll try my best. I've already re-established a connection with it, and all that's left is for it to slowly recover. Brando spoke without thinking. He thought that if it could move, he wouldn't be here talking nonsense with her. Not to mention the Lich, even Rothko himself would have a hard time dealing with a level 23 gargoyle. Breton wasn't satisfied with this answer. You're really hopelessly stupid, to be able to control a gargoyle in the sky and still be discovered by others. If only we had a scout in the sky right now, things would be much better. So someone's ability is to shirk responsibility, is it because you won't fight without me? Brando taunted. Alright, stop arguing, we still have to fight our own battles. However, kid, we believe that what you said is true, but Madara's advance party is still in front of us, eyeing us covetously. Do you really think that we can escape with a few hundred people? Martin muttered to himself and asked. That's your responsibility, Captain Martin. Well said. This veteran of the November War couldn't help but look deeply at Brando. He felt that it was a little strange, as if this kid knew what he was thinking. Every time he opened his mouth, he would say something that tickled him. It was like when you wanted to perform in an opera, someone would immediately set up the stage for you. He couldn't help but think that if this kid changed his profession and became the Emperor's jester, he would definitely have a bright future. However, only the heavens knew that Brando knew his character like the back of his hand. Thinking of this, Martin had already stood up and ordered in a deep voice, I order the Butchie garrison to gather here, and prepare to break out of the encirclement. The surroundings became solemn, and then the guards stood up with a swoosh. Martin then turned his head and said, Zeta, go tell the villagers to gather their men. Now it's time for the men of Erewhon to protect their homes and loved ones. Zeta was stunned and turned his head, Captain. What are you looking at? Are you afraid of death in the end? Let me tell you, now it's time for you to fulfill your promise. Young lads of the Butchie garrison, before dawn, we will launch an attack on Madara's vanguard. I predict that none of you will survive, but it doesn't matter, because the villagers of Butchie will bring our bravery out, and tell everyone in the outside world that we are not afraid of death, and have already fulfilled our responsibilities. In Brando's eyes, this veteran of the November War swept his gaze across everyone's face, his expression solemn. My former commanding officer always told me that dying to protect others without losing honor is the fate of a soldier. Now, I'm giving this sentence to all of you, and I hope that you will remember this honor. So, go do what you have to do. Breton, I want you to lead the rest of the villagers to break out of the encirclement at the River of Daggers. I only have one request, do you understand? I understand. Breton's eyes flashed with a trace of light, but he still lowered his head and answered. Very good. Martin nodded. Kid, and Freya, the two of you. I want you to immediately join the Butchie garrison as militia, do you have any objections? Freya immediately shook her head. But Brando nodded in front of everyone, I have an objection. Martin paused for a moment. Speak, he could not help but look at Brendel, but if you're a coward who's afraid of death, then you can get the hell out of here. Butchie's guards will never accept cowards. There was a burst of low laughter, but surprisingly, Breton did not say a word. Brando turned his head to look at that guy, and was somewhat surprised. But his gaze fell on the Roman, and he remembered the merchant girl's words. I've never seen them before, for as long as I can remember, it was my aunt who was by my side. She said, little Roman, when you grow up, you have to repay her. So you want to be a merchant? Yes. What a strange idea. It's fine. Brando smiled in his heart and raised his head. Captain Martin, your decision from Butchie's point of view is not a problem, but have you forgotten a problem? What problem? Martin was stunned again, and he was even more curious about this kid. The 3 towns of Butchie are the buffer zone of Fortress Reedon, and the garrison of Butchie has always been the sentinel of Fortress Reedon. If we choose to leave, then what will happen to Fortress Reedon without any warning? If you say that we're doing our duty, then I don't think so. Brando spoke frankly, but the expressions of the others gradually changed. He was right, if that was the case, then they really did not do their duty. If Madara was lucky enough to break through Fortress Reedon's defense line, then the defense system of Fort Vermeer, Fortress Reedon would be in danger. And the whole Grimoires region would be under the attack of the undead army. Thinking that one day, Madara's army would arrive at Bragg's, the youths could not help but be speechless. But what could they do? We've already done our best. Under the circumstances, we can only do so much. It's not that we gave up on Fortress Reedon, it's that Fortress Reedon gave up on us. Martin stared at Brando, and he knew that if this young man was willing to say it, then he must have a solution. Yes, I know of a way to break through to Fortress Reedon. Although the chances are slim, it's better than nothing. Brando spoke as if he had squeezed out all the air in his chest, and he let out a deep breath. He turned back to look at the Roman, and the future merchant girl lowered her head, thinking about something, and grabbed her bag anxiously. Which one? The Zevel Mountain Path. Martin could not help but take a deep breath. Although he searched his memory, he still subconsciously avoided this place. He wanted to remind Brando, and ask him if he knew the dangers of this place. The mountain path was in the south of the Belder Forest, passing through the Pine River Valley, and was close to the border between Erewhon and the Barbarian Forest. Once they crossed the valley, they would reach the edge of civilization, and there would be no end to it. Ever since the year of the Howling, L350, no one who entered the valley had ever come out alive. There was a rumor that there was a dragon in the valley. He felt that attacking Madara would at least give him a chance of survival, but sending his men there would be like throwing meat buns at a dog. He thought for a while, and still could not get rid of this deep-rooted thought. That's a dead end, young man. The old soldier could not help but shake his head. Being responsible doesn't require you to do it, you only need to do it before. Brando replied. But I can't send my young men there to die. That would be irresponsible to them. A warrior should die with honor like a warrior. It's fine. Brando replied, I'll go. There was dead silence. What? Say that again. Martin was dumbfounded. I'll go. Why? The responsibility of the Butchie garrison has nothing to do with you. Young man, if you want to be brave, you might as well join us. The old soldier could not help but ask. No, I'm not trying to be brave. Brando turned to look at Roman and smiled. I have a reason why I must go. As for the other reasons, they are just incidental. So, little Roman, are you willing to go with me? Brando. Roman was stunned. He raised his head, and his face was full of surprise. P.S. Thank you for your support. Amber's collection is not enough. If you think it's good, please help to promote it. Thank you. V-. That's all for today. I have to go home at noon. Chapter 33. The decision to split into 3 was quickly approved, and the only thing left was to move out. Martin personally led the guards to attack Madara's undead army, while Breton took the opportunity to lead the remaining villagers of Butchie to cross the River of Daggers. At the same time, Brando and the Roman crossed the Vizier mountain path to Fortress Reedon. The time was 3 hours later. When the announcement was made, most of the young guards silently turned around and left. They didn't say much, and only the clanking of their equipment could be heard as they walked away. The campfire crackled as it burned, and the light from the fire cast a messy shadow on the beach that was covered with fallen leaves and pebbles. Other than the attack at dawn, everyone had to prepare for a lot of things. The night was still long, and the last few hours were more like torture for everyone. Freya had to gather the rest of the 3rd squad, while Brando asked for a backpack to store the remaining bottle of number 5 holy water. The extra bottle was already given to Johnson, and saved the young man's life in exchange for the goodwill of the Butchie villagers and the gratitude of their relatives. Even though he said so, Brando still couldn't bear to watch someone die with his own eyes. He felt that as a modern person, he was constantly affected by the conflict in this war-torn world. Brando thought about it and felt relieved. It was the pursuit of beauty that motivated him to change the world. He casually stuffed 2 days' worth of food into his backpack. It was mainly dried meat and a type of cake made with flour, salt, and plant tubers. The world's productivity in the Amber Sword was relatively high, and you wouldn't see such abundant resources in the real Middle Ages. In fact, only those who truly understood this world would know that this was a world with a high level of civilization, but its development seemed to be on a different path from Earth. However, when he took out the long-necked bottle containing holy water number 5, our protagonist was stunned for a moment. He found a piece of cardboard stuck to the bottom of the bottle. It looked like it was stuck, so he easily took it off. That thing was about the size of a poker card. It was about the length of a palm and the width of a palm. On the back, there was a pattern that looked like a magic array. On the front, there was an oil painting of a kneeling knight wearing armor and holding a sword up high. On the top left of the card, there was an ancient number 2 written on it, and at the bottom of the card, there were 6 yellow crystals. Brando recognized the 6 crystals on this item. Their scientific name in the game was Elemental Attribute, and the 6 yellow crystals meant that the Earth attribute was 6. But what was this? Brando was very knowledgeable, and there were very few things in the game that he did not know. However, the item in his hand gave him a difficult problem. It took him a while to remember that he might have accidentally taken it out from Gerald's tomb, but that didn't provide him with any clues. In the game, he could still search for a bunch of random knowledge. But here, Brando only knew the local knowledge, basic knowledge, and military knowledge. What did you want him to search for? He couldn't help but hold up the card and ask Romaine, who was concentrating on mending her skirt with a needle and thread, "Do you recognize this thing, little Roman?" "No, don't call me that." Roman raised his eyebrows. What is this, a tarot card?" "I know tarot cards." "Then I don't know either." Brando looked at the card and was about to say something. Suddenly, he squinted his eyes. He saw Breton and a few other guards leading their horses from the shadows of the forest not far away. What are these guys trying to do? He suddenly remembered Martin's abnormal behavior when he was negotiating with him. His heart was filled with doubts. He couldn't help but put away the card and stood up to follow them. "Roman, wait for me here." "Yes, Brando." Although the guards were all outstanding youths, and their individual strength was far superior to the average person, it was a pity that their vigilance wasn't that good. The group of them walked all the way without noticing that someone was following them from afar. It must be known that Brando was a small team player, and if a few people wanted to go against a large guild, they would need to use stealth techniques. Thus, although he wasn't a master in this field, he was at least a veteran. It was quite easy for him to deceive these youths who had no experience in tracking. However, Brando himself didn't realize that he had already used his old tricks. This scene was nothing in the eyes of others, but in the eyes of Zeta, who was standing guard on the tree, it was inconceivable. He recognized the youth called Brando at a glance. Their captain had personally told them that he was just an ignorant and incompetent fellow who only had passable swordsmanship. However, the militia's swordsmanship was nothing in their eyes. The militia's #1 swordsmen, such as Freya and Irene, could easily take on 10 people. They just didn't want to make a move. Since they had joined the guards, they naturally had their own pride. Take Breton for example. No matter how much he tried to bully Brando, he would never ask for a duel to teach him a lesson. That was because in their eyes, that would be lowering their status. But now, Zeta saw a completely different matter. He remembered that during his scouting course, there was a scout from the Mountain Corps who imparted some combat experience to them. That scout was a knight who had received the Crimson Medal once, but compared to the youth in front of him, his skills were nothing. Brando was like a shadow in the darkness. Every time he moved, he would follow the direction of the fire in the nearby valley. If not for the fact that he happened to be in between the light source and Zeta would have thought that he wouldn't even have the chance to discover him. Could it be that Vice Captain Breton's understanding of him was wrong? Was he actually a scout from the regular corps? Or was he a spy from Madara? Zeta suddenly felt nervous. What should he do? First of all, he couldn't make a sound, or else Vice Captain's plan would be ruined. This place was less than 30 meters away from the camp, and any movement would attract the attention of other people. He couldn't help but take a deep breath, and made a hand gesture to Ryan, who was on another tree not far away, indicating him to pay attention to Brando's direction. At first, Ryan was puzzled. Why did this guy keep pointing to a place where there was no one? Did he drink too much? But he immediately saw Brando in that direction, and his expression changed. Damn, is this a chameleon? What do we do? He immediately asked. I'll go first, you cover me from the right. Zeta replied. Are you sure? Yes, the opponent's swordsmanship is very good. He's at the middle level of the unranked. The middle level of the unranked was a swordsman's specialization, and was roughly equivalent to the best of the guards. Above that was the white level swordsman, which was roughly equivalent to a level 5 to 20 player. Zeta was afraid that the opponent was still hiding his strength, so he deliberately raised Breton's estimation. Ryan nodded, indicating that he understood. Brando was also in a state of shock. More than 20 people, more than 10 warhorses, Breton, are you trying to rebel? But he knew that it was impossible and unnecessary. After following for a while, he heard the people in front whispering to each other. Just as he was about to move closer, he suddenly felt a sense of danger. It was too quiet, and he didn't hear the sound of the insects from the beginning. Brando was very experienced. Although in this kind of operation, the scouting and searching was usually done by the team's nightingale, he still remembered the nightingale who worked with him the longest. She was a girl called Shadow, but it was a pity that she didn't play with him anymore. However, after fighting so many battles, he had developed an instinctive acuity. Even the slightest movement of grass in the wind would alert him. Just like that day in the old mansion in Butchie when he predicted Rothko's scouting. Brando immediately felt a hand trying to wrap around his neck from behind. This was a scout's technique. Brando leaned back, one hand holding the opponent's elbow, and the other hand pressing down on the opponent's wrist. He slid down and raised both his hands. Then, he suddenly pushed forward. A black figure flew out and hit the tree in front of him with a muffled groan. Their strength was about the same, but he had a slight advantage. But when he saw that the black figure didn't immediately defend himself, but instead turned around and rushed towards him, his heart tightened, and he immediately understood that there was another person. With a flash of silver, Brando's thorn of light was unsheathed. He dodged to the side, and the sword in his hand was already at the neck of the person who rushed up from behind. The faint light from the sword reflected the two people's faces. Ryan and Zeta were stunned. They thought that Brando's swordsmanship might be stronger than their vice-captain's, but it was probably limited. They had seen Breden's swordsmanship, and he was one of the best among the official members of the garrison. But just from his swordsmanship alone, it was impossible for him to fight two people at once. They couldn't help but feel as if they were in a dream. Looking at the sword in the opponent's hand, what was going on? Captain Martin is a veteran of the November War, everyone knows this. He has already served the kingdom with his life once, and has proven his loyalty. Listen to me, everyone, we have an old saying, right? If Madame Martha allows someone to live, then you have to cherish this luck. We cannot let a veteran who had a narrow escape from the battlefield of glory gamble his life again. That is why I came up with this plan. Please let me lead you to fight for Butchie. This is not because I want to deprive anyone of their glory, but because I cannot escape. Well said, Vice Captain. We support you. Captain Martin will understand you. Breton smiled. When Martin ordered him to lead the villagers to break through the river of daggers, he had already decided to refuse. But he knew the old man's temper, and he would definitely not allow him to refuse. Thus, he decided to take a gamble. He also understood that Martin wanted to protect him. The old captain had said more than once that he would one day stand out and become a pillar of the kingdom. But Breton also understood that Erwin did not need a coward. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but think of Brando. That ignorant and incompetent guy actually took the initiative to suggest passing through Sevale Mountain Pass. He couldn't help but maliciously speculate that Brando was just looking for an excuse to escape, because it didn't seem impossible. But at this moment, a soft sound in the quiet forest made everyone turn their heads. They saw Brando pointing his sword at Zeta and Ryan as they walked out from behind the bushes. At first, the atmosphere was silent, then everyone's face revealed an expression as if they had seen a ghost. Zeta. Ryan, what are you doing? Haha, a mistake. Zeta had an awkward expression. On the other hand, Brando looked at the usually overbearing vice-captain with a face full of surprise. At this moment, the vice-captain's face was as dark as ever. How could it not be dark? If he shouted here, the vice-captain's plan would be ruined. But Brando did not expect that this guy would be so daring. He actually wanted to replace Martin and lead these youths who were willing to follow him to launch a feint attack on Madara. What kind of spirit was this? Brando felt that it was a little funny, but he couldn't help but feel some surprise and admiration. Was this the innocence and hot-bloodedness of youths, or the pursuit of their dreams? But he saw a trace of responsibility on Breton's gloomy face. It was a sense of responsibility towards this vice-captain. What are you trying to do? Breton asked in a deep voice. Of course, he wanted to use a stronger tone, but he didn't want Brendel to ruin his plan. Even though it seemed almost inevitable. Brando lowered his sword. P.S. Faint. When I woke up in the morning and saw that I was in 8th place, I happily went home, but when I came back after dinner, I saw that I had fallen back to 10th place. I wanted to vomit blood. Today's favorites only increased a little. I'm sad T_T fellow students, please give me your support, please let Amber's results reach a higher level. Also, did I offend you to post the same post 3 times? Chapter 34. Brando put down his sword. It's too dark, it's not a good idea to come out at this time. He smiled and glanced at these people. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he walked past the 20 or so people. The young guard subconsciously opened up a path for him. Breton held his sword tightly and stared at Brando. However, he restrained himself, because he knew that once he made a move, he would not be able to cover up the commotion. The people beside him wanted to rush forward, but they were stopped by him. The atmosphere in the small forest was tense. But Brando walked to the end of the forest and stopped, saying, "Breton, so you learned how to disobey orders in the guards. And your plan is so lousy. You should know Captain Martin's temper. You actually want to force him to agree to your request. If it were me, I would sneak out with my men and leave only one person to inform him." Everyone was stunned. Breton's hand on the sword hilt twitched. A trace of doubt flashed in his eyes. He could not help but wonder what Brendel was trying to do. "Tell me, when are you going to attack? I'll decide when to move." "Before dawn." The young vice-captain thought for a while. Although he was suspicious of Brando's motives, his plan did sound tempting, and it was much more feasible than their original plan. "Then you better hide in the Fox Forest. That area should be the closest to Madara's undead army. Also, I'll pick up a piece of paper and pass it to Martin to let him know that you will attack before the Crimson Star disappears, right? Also, pay attention when dealing with the liches. Their spells will only work on people with weak willpower." "Brando, what are you trying to do? How did you find Zayde and the others? Where did you learn your swordsmanship?" Breton put down his sword and asked with a gloomy face. "Well, after this farewell, I may not see you again. You may not see me again. Be it enemies or enemies, we may not see each other again. Maybe it's just a memory. After all, we are Erwin's people. Good luck." Brando waved his hand, indicating that it was not worth mentioning what he wanted to do. Breton was silent. Let's not talk about how Breton's decision made Martin fly into a rage. Freya had already gathered a small group of militia, but found that she had nowhere to go. The veteran from the November War had no choice but to let her form a group of militia, and they prepared to break out of the encirclement at the River of Daggers. At the same time, Jonathan and Petit Finus were sending off Brando and Roman. Petit Finus was ordered to leave the militia by Freya because he was too young. He was dissatisfied, but he was still young. Brando praised him a little and he was full of energy again, saying that he wanted to go to Fortress Reden. Of course, he could not agree. If he did, he would probably be stabbed by Freya's sword. Although Brando needed a helper, Petit Finus was too young and not suitable. He patted the little rascal's head. Jonathan, who was at the side, did not dare to speak. He looked at Brando with shame. He knew that it was because of this young man that he was able to survive. Of course, he could not blame anyone else but himself for being too cowardly. "I'm sorry, Brando, thank you for saving me. It's okay. Everyone has a moment of confusion. Jonathan, everyone is willing to bring you along because they believe that you will return to them. All right, cheer up. Don't let others look down on you." "Thank you." Brando nodded and looked at the sky. The stars were fading away, indicating the arrival of dawn. But because of the lack of light from the stars and the moon, it would be the darkest moment of the world. But it did not matter because the dawn was already on the other side of the mountains. Withdrawing his gaze from the dark shadows of the mountains on the horizon, he and Roman lit the torches together. Although it was not wise to light a torch in the dark, the direction they were going was far away from Madara's territory. Even if there were occasional beasts, Brando thought that the biggest threat in the Belder forest would be the wolves. At most, 3 to 5 of them would be easy to deal with. Besides, beasts were afraid of fire. The two followed the dense forest all the way to the south. At the end of the torch, they could see the black pine forest that was commonly seen in the Grand Region. Occasionally, there would be shadows of animals, but they would disappear in a flash. They crossed 1 or 2 mountains and looked down. The terrain gradually became rugged. What was strange was that the surrounding trees seemed to have begun to wither. Jagged rocks protruded from the ground, especially at the bottom of the valley. There were rocks everywhere. "Brando?" Roman asked. The sudden change in the environment was a little scary. "Yes, it's nothing. Follow me closely." Seeing such a scene, Brando knew that they were close to their destination. It was not that he had never been to the Seville Mountain Road in the game. It was a very famous place, and it was very dangerous for players below level 20. But Brando knew of an exception. He could not help but recall some memories of that place. The Seville Mountain Road was in the southern part of the Belder Forest. It passed through the Pine River Valley in a lush forest. The reason for opening this mountain road was to transport wood to the lower reaches of the Pine River. But later, as Madara's power expanded, most of the timber factories withered. As a result, the Seville Mountain Road declined and became a path for illegal merchants to smuggle goods. Later, a golden demonic tree took root here. It extracted nutrients from the ground and caused the forest to wither. It also killed any creatures that entered carelessly. Slowly, the Seville Mountain Road became a death zone. The level 31 golden demonic tree leader had already awakened its second level of power. Its strength was on par with an iron-ranked swordsman or intermediate wizard. Even the regular army would not easily provoke such a troublesome enemy. Moreover, it did not cut off the connection between Fortress Reden and Butchie. The kingdom's knights were too lazy to deal with it. In the game, this was a famous dungeon area. The golden demonic tree leader dominated this area for the first 3 years of the game. The NPC's way of dealing with it was to place a wooden board at the entrance. It was written in Dwarven, Elven and Cruz's common language. Danger. Those who enter this place should give up all hope. Of course, there were still some players who wanted to challenge themselves. But those who entered alone could not even see the face of the golden demonic tree. About a year after the game started, people started to form groups to explore the area. But most of them only reached the Pine River Valley before they were forced to retreat. Even in the second half of the second year, there were still news of teams being wiped out in the local bars. It became the topic of conversation after a meal. Then, it entered the Second War of the Black Rose. The number of teams that entered the Seville Mountain Road decreased, but they became more professional. Brando remembered that he entered the valley during that era. His experience in the game was mediocre. He was neither too aggressive nor too conservative. He remembered that his team went all the way to the Pine River Valley. From there, they could even see the endless dark forest and the shadowy mountains. But the deepest memory of that adventure was not the scenery that was so different from Butchie, but the strength of the monsters in the dungeon and the frequency of encountering them. Overall, the team was almost at their limit every day. In the end, they could not hold on any longer and had to retreat. But in less than 2 months, a guild called Murrh completely solved the problem in this area. That guild was famous for a time, but later people found out that they were not that strong. They were just lucky to have found a special way to fight. Later, this way of fighting was put on the internet by some people, and it even led to a craze of soloing the golden demonic tree. Back then, in order to farm a golden demonic tree's heart, Brando was one of the beneficiaries of this video. But at that time, the average level of Butchie was 27. Brando remembered that he was also level 27 when he entered the dungeon. But this time, he only asked to pass through the Seville Mountain Road, and not to kill the golden demonic tree boss. Moreover, he still had the Ring of the Wind Empress and the Thorn of Light that had a purifying effect against dark creatures. Otherwise, he would have been helpless. Thinking back to that time, the price of magic equipment in the game was still high even after the first year. When he entered the Zavale Mountain Road, he did not even think about equipment with strength over 10 ounces. As for the Ring of the Wind Empress and the Thorn of Light, they were like floating clouds. But in this life, because of his foresight, he actually had these two items from the start. He could not help but feel that it was unreal. If he was lucky enough to escape this calamity, thinking about the future, Brando could not help but feel a little excited. But because of this, he had to cherish the opportunity in front of him. He tightened his grip on the sword in his hand, and turned around to ask the Roman to follow him. The future merchant lady seemed to have some talent for adventuring. She stretched out her hands and jumped left and right on the jagged rocks in the valley. She was actually very agile. Dawn had finally arrived, and the stars had disappeared. The surroundings had sunk into darkness and deathly stillness. Only the torches were left burning, and the flickering light reflected the deep ravines and shadows on the stacked rocks. From afar, they looked like two sparks in the forest. Brando remembered that there was a place to take shelter from the wind. It was too dangerous to enter the Zavale Mountain Road at this time. He decided that it would be safer to travel during the day. After all, this place was almost out of the range of Madara's undead army. The earliest Madara army to arrive at Fortress Reden was the Cabias tribe, and it was on the morning of the third day. This meant that he still had a whole day to plan his plan. There was plenty of time. He looked up and vaguely saw a road sign in front of him. P.S. Today is the birthday of Decadent, the author of The Demon Hunter of Rebirth. Tomorrow is the day he will receive guests. This seems to be a good omen. Students who have monthly tickets, remember to support Decadent tomorrow. Treat it as his belated birthday present. Recommendation tickets. Of course, leave them to me. Book the tickets for tomorrow and prepare to be on the new book list. I feel like the results are a little bad. Some people have already predicted that this book will be a flop. Please support me and break this myth. Chapter 35. After entering the valley, the further in they went, the more desolate the environment became. There was almost no vegetation on the surface, and the uninhabited mountain path passed through sharp rocks. Only withered grass and brambles grew from the cracks in the rock walls. In the distant darkness, there seemed to be some withered tree branches. The cold wind in the mountains was like black smoke as it passed through the branches, making creaking sounds. Brando knew that this was because the nutrients in the soil had been absorbed by the golden demonic tree. He held the torch to illuminate the surrounding rock walls. Occasionally, there would be a few white skeletons in the shadows. They looked like animals that had accidentally entered the forbidden area and became the golden demonic tree's food. The Roman held the torch and followed closely behind. She covered her bag with one hand and looked around nervously and curiously. This was the first time she had been so far away from home. It was as if the dream of a merchant was about to come true. The dangers, excitement, and the unknown wealth and treasures on the trade route had always supported merchants and adventurers to prosper on this continent. Besides, following Brando gave her a sense of security. The two flames passed through the valley one after the other. Brando placed his hand on the hilt of his sword. In the game, once they passed through this area, they would enter the territory of a type of monster, the rotten beast. The golden demonic tree was a terrifying monster. Or rather, it was a type of golden tree. Its original form was probably an elven holy tree, but after the tree herder implanted the blood of God, it awakened into a golden demonic tree. Tree herders were one of the major cults in the game. In this war-torn world, where the flames of civilization could not reach, darkness thrived. Not only did the undead exist, but there were also cults living in the soil. In the game, villains like the tree herders acted mysteriously. They left their traces everywhere, like a thread that ran through the entire game. They let people know that they had a certain purpose, but no one knew what it was. Brando was no exception. The golden demonic tree had two abilities. The first was to animate plants. It could turn the shrubs on the land it controlled into monsters in human form, called rotten beasts. The rotten beasts were like the tentacles and spies of the golden demonic tree. They were everywhere in the valley. A single rotten beast was level 7 in the game. Its combat power was about the same as the garrison members that Brando had seen before, but its intelligence was low. The stronger rotten beasts were above level 13 and had awakened level 1 powers. They were also troublesome opponents for Brando. The second ability was the enchanted fruit. When the golden demonic tree's fruits fell to the ground, they would split open and give birth to a furry, barbarian-like creature. They would grow up to 2 meters tall within a day. These were the golden demonic tree's children and elite guards. Their levels ranged from level 20 to 22. Brando's only trump card against them was the Ring of the Wind Empress. After decades of accumulation, the number of demons and rotten beasts in the canyon had reached a considerable number. If not for Brando's confidence, it would have been impossible for him and the Roman to safely pass through the canyon. Of course, the golden demonic tree itself was not weak. After all, it was a tier 2 monster. However, the young man did not intend to provoke it. He knew where it was, so naturally, he would not go near it. Along the way, only the rustling of their footsteps could be heard. In the silence, it was somewhat frightening. But Brando felt a sense of familiarity. In the past, he had also brought a large number of ropes, torches, oil lamps, hooks, and rations to find the golden demonic tree. He had followed the same route thousands of times to find trouble with the golden demonic tree. The golden demonic tree would drop 20 ounces to 30-ounce strength equipment. At that time, the drops were the best. At that time, any player with a bit of skill would choose to do so. Especially the rumored heart of the golden demonic tree, which recovered 1 HP per minute. In the early days of the game, it was a godly item. But now, the only difference was that he had the future merchant lady behind him. Brando suddenly felt like he was taking a girl on an adventure in the forest with him. Wasn't the adventure of two people quite romantic? Brando. The Roman suddenly whispered. Brando turned his head and noticed that the other party's gaze was on his hand. He was slightly startled as he noticed that the thorn of light in his hand was emitting a white light from its scabbard. There were undead nearby. He was shocked, but immediately reacted. Even if Madara didn't control this area, they would still send a small team to monitor it and ensure that no undead escaped. It was just a small team. Brando relaxed a little. A few low-level undead were not enough for him to deal with, but he had to be careful not to alert the rotten beasts in the canyon. He pulled out his sword and pointed the thorn of light in a direction. The light on the blade was clearly brighter, and Brando immediately knew that the small team of undead was in this direction. He gestured for the Roman to move further away, then extinguished the torch and moved step by step in that direction. There was indeed a small team of undead in the canyon, but these skeletons were currently in a bit of trouble. Leading them was the Lich Kabuka. Its performance in Butchie not only allowed the human scout to escape, but also led to the death of one of its comrades. Rothko sent it here to punish it for its disappointing performance, and also to remind it not to be too eager to appear too smart in front of its boss or master. Kabuka obviously understood, but the more important thing was how to block the attacks of the 3 monsters in front of it. Initially, it and its skeleton soldiers had killed a creature in the canyon that was covered in thorns and looked like a human-shaped shrub that stood up. Now, its own kind seemed to have come looking for them. There were 3 of them. These monsters were shrouded in a pile of withered branches, and under their heads, there were 2 lumps of fire staring at these undead creatures. There were a few scattered skeletons around them. The battle seemed to be on the verge of breaking out. What are these roots and grass? The green flames in Kabuka's eye sockets flickered. Seeing that the other party was about to attack again, it could only brace itself and change its skeleton soldiers to strong bows. It extracted the blue soul fire to ignite the arrows, and then shot out a wave of arrows. Unexpectedly, the two rotten beasts that came into contact with the flames let out hissing screams and turned into two lumps of flames on the sand. The lich immediately let out a cackle. This thing was stronger than its skeleton soldiers, but as long as it was a plant, it would be afraid of fire. Right, why didn't it think of this before? What a blunder. Kabuka raised its bone staff, and with a bang, half of the last rotten beast's body exploded, filling the air with wood chips. Seeing the lich below dancing with joy, Brando, who had climbed up a protruding white rock, couldn't help but laugh. This thing really didn't know what was good for it, daring to use magic here. Magic was one of the golden demonic tree's favorite nutrients. The golden demonic tree's thirst for it was like a drug. As long as there was a trace of magic in this area, the golden demonic tree would immediately discover it, and the lich didn't even notice. It really wanted to die. However, he was also in a bit of trouble. After all, he and the Roman were here. He had to find a way to quickly get to a higher place, or else he would be buried together with these brainless undead. He turned around and pulled the Roman up. The merchant girl saw the small group of undead below and couldn't help but blink her eyes. Her bright eyes weren't filled with fear, but curiosity. "I recognize that lich," she said softly. "Sure. It wasn't that easy to differentiate between undead." Brando only thought that the Roman was joking. Between the skeleton soldiers and the lich, there was almost no difference in appearance other than the slight difference in soul waves. It wasn't just the low-level undead that were like this. Even the high-level undead were distinguished by their accessories or other obvious characteristics. "I really do recognize it, Brando. I saw it from afar the last time in your house," the merchant girl said solemnly. Yes, yes. Be quiet. If we alarm them, we'll have to bear the consequences." Brando squinted his eyes. He could already see some rustling figures moving forward in the shadows. Judging from the way they moved, they should be rotten beasts. After counting to 30, he couldn't count anymore. There were too many of them, and it was too dark. However, the lich still hadn't ordered the skeleton soldiers to extinguish the soul fire on their arrows. Plants were attracted to light, so he had already concluded that the lich was just a skeleton scattered on the ground. "There seems to be a lot of things around us, Brando," the Roman said. "Yes, come with me. Lower your body and don't alarm them." The two of them continued to climb higher. Brando led the way in front, while the Roman knelt on the rock and moved forward bit by bit. Now, he was beginning to feel the benefits of bringing the merchant girl along. She didn't panic at all in such an environment, which was difficult for normal people to do. He remembered that in the game, when he teamed up with some female party members to enter some scary places, they would often encounter people shouting and wrangling. That wasn't the most embarrassing thing. The most embarrassing thing was that some men were like that too. As he thought about it, he quietly looked downwards. With the lich and its skeleton soldiers as the center, the rotten beasts had already gathered into a few torrents. Kabuka finally sensed that something was wrong. It subconsciously chanted the incantation for Curtain of Darkness. But halfway through, two dark red monsters charged out from the crevices of the rocks and tore its skeleton soldiers to shreds. "Martha above, Lord Rothko. What the hell is this? There's no need to monitor this place at all." Kabuka didn't care about its subordinates at all. There was no mercy in Madara's army. Of course, it was still allowed to protect itself, so it scuttled up the rock behind it. The lich's agility and strength weren't low, but normal people would be easily fooled by its appearance as a mage. However, Brando didn't appreciate this scene at all, because he saw the lich scuttling towards him. Damn, can't you choose a better direction? He didn't even dare to pull out the thorn of light. Otherwise, with a light stick in his hand in the darkness, wouldn't he immediately become a target for everyone? But he immediately saw a dark red rotten beast suddenly jump up and grab the lich's calf. It dragged it down. At this moment, the canyon was already surrounded by rotten beasts. The skeleton soldiers were probably already torn to pieces. If Kabuka hesitated for a second, it would immediately follow in its footsteps. Get rid of it. Brando couldn't help but yell in his heart. At the same time, he felt Roman grabbing his shoulder tightly from behind. She seemed to be as nervous as him. Anyone could see that if the lich got any closer, the rotten beasts would discover them as well. However, the young lady's breath was like a fragrant orchid, which made Brando a little restless. He turned around and saw Romaine staring blankly in another direction. Brando subconsciously followed her gaze and suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. Author's note, clang clang, a new week has arrived, please support me. Tomorrow is the release of Little Decadence Land of Rebirth, Demon Hunter. Legend has it that every monthly vote will give him an extra chapter. Chapter 36. Brando followed her gaze and almost threw out the thorn of light along with its scabbard. What kind of situation was this? Between the jagged rocks at the bottom of the canyon, there was a group of shrub-like monsters shuttling back and forth. They followed the lich Kabuka as it climbed up the rocks, looking like a black tide. On the other side, a slender figure was trying its best to climb up the jagged mountain path. She was carrying a huge bag with a sword hanging from it. Her long ponytail moved up and down with the girl's leap up and down the cliff. Freya. Brando rubbed his eyes, thinking that he had seen wrongly. But even if he had seen wrongly, the Roman wouldn't. The merchant girl had a nervous expression. That was Freya. But wasn't she supposed to be following Martin to the River of Daggers? Why was she here? Brando didn't believe that she would abandon her third militia squad. It's Freya, Brando. I saw it. Don't make a fuss. I'll think of a way. Brando, Freya will be caught. We have to help her, right? The merchant girl turned around and asked eagerly. No, Roman. I don't need your help. I'll think of a way. Unfortunately, he didn't even dare to freak out. The situation was very delicate, but the key to changing the situation wasn't in his hands. It was whether or not Lady Martha was in a good mood today. But unfortunately, it didn't look good. On the other side, danger was everywhere. Brando turned around and saw that the lich had unhesitatingly removed its leg bone, allowing the rotten beast that had grabbed it to slide back into the crowd of monsters. Then, it flipped over and used its bony hands to support its body as it climbed up the rocks. Its 1.7-ounce strength was enough to support a skeleton that was not too heavy to climb up the jagged rocks as if it was flying. However, when Kabuka tried to climb up, it was stunned for a moment. Kabuka raised its head. The green flames in its eye sockets reflected the shocked and angry face of the young human on the rock. At first, it felt that the ripple of life was somewhat familiar, but it didn't matter to an undead, because it had already raised its bone staff and waved it at Brando. Human scum, it thought. At this time, Brando couldn't care less. He pulled out his sword, and the thorn of light emitted a dazzling radiance in the darkness. He stabbed it into Kabuka's skull. With a light cracking sound, a golden flame shot out from the wound on the lich's forehead, spreading in all directions. Ka! Kabuka's voice was stuck in its throat. Brando's sword was so fast that it couldn't even react before it felt its eternal life coming to an end. It had thought that it would become a great necromancer. It used all its strength to fall back, but the young man reached down and grabbed its skeletal hand. Kabuka was stunned for a moment, wondering why the other party wanted to save it. But it was an undead that would forever belong to the Dragon of Disaster. How could it accept the help of a lowly human? Just as Kabuka was in a dilemma, it saw the other party nimbly tear off the ring on its index finger. Damn it! Human scum, robber. 3 experience points. This was Kabuka's last thought, and the soul fire in its eyes was extinguished. However, Brando was surprised that this lich actually had a good ring, the Ring of Cobwebs. +0. 2 perception. It had a familiar pattern. He also had one in the past, and he didn't throw it away as a memento. Perception symbolized the ability of a character to feel that they were in a different dimension. Through hearing, smell, sight, touch, and taste, one could perfect their understanding of space and matter. This was a very important attribute in the game. At that time in Brags, there was a low-level dungeon called the Public Tomb. Because open flames couldn't be used in the dungeon, and the small team of players had to constantly avoid a preset high-level monster in the intricate underground tunnels, equipment with high perception and dexterity were very popular. This ring was given to him by a friend of Brando's. Thinking back, it was really bitter. In order to gather a set of 10-ounce perception equipment, he almost went bankrupt. In the end, he still couldn't clear the Public Tomb. At the mention of the Public Tomb, he suddenly remembered that there was a good item for warriors in that dungeon. It was the Badge of Courage, +2 military swordsmanship. He slapped his forehead. He had almost forgotten about this. Back then, he didn't want to spend any money to get this badge. Brando, Brando. The Roman's voice was full of anxiety. Brando was shocked. Miss Merchant wasn't usually so anxious. Did something happen to Freya? He hurriedly threw away the skeleton in his hand and looked back. He just happened to see a rotten beast chasing after Freya, who was running on the sharp rocks. It stretched out its withered claw and hooked the girl's backpack strap, then pulled her back. Freya, be careful. The merchant girl cried out. She stood up and lifted her skirt, wanting to run down. But Brando pulled back the girl who didn't understand the situation. What a joke. How could he let her help him at this time? You stay here obediently. He threw the cobweb ring to the Roman and let her keep it safe. There was a limit to how many magical items a character could equip. In the witch's view, this was related to a person's magic source. But for Brando, a level 2 mercenary with a total of 40 ounces of equipment was already the limit. Okay, Brando, but Brando looked around and found that he didn't feel safe leaving the careless merchant girl here. Previously, when he pulled out the Thorn of Light, its brilliance illuminated the surroundings. He had already become the target of public criticism. If he left the Roman here now, she might also attract attacks. If the little Roman was injured, then even 10,000 deaths wouldn't be enough to absolve the blame. But Freya was also in danger. He had long regarded this determined and kind-hearted girl as his most valuable companion. How could he be indifferent? This was really a dilemma. Of course, these thoughts flashed through Brando's mind in an instant. At the bottom of the valley, Freya struggled to break free from the rotten beast's claw. She struggled to run forward 2 steps, but fell down again. She had already seen the two of them, and a glimmer of hope appeared in her panicked eyes. Brando, before she could finish her sentence, she was dragged back. Draw your sword. Brando shouted. It tangled my backpack, I can't reach it, this idiot. Brando decisively handed the Thorn of Light to the Roman. This sword can restrain them. Protect yourself. What about you, Brando? The young man shook his head and signaled her not to worry. He turned around and ran towards Freya's direction. Damn it, it's not the first time anyway. Lady Martha likes to joke with me, so I'll just let her do it. But just like in the game, monsters always preferred to find trouble with the weak. Before he could jump down 2 levels, a human-shaped shrub covered in thorns blocked his path. Young Rotten Beast, level 7 monster, strength 2. 2 ounces, vitality 3 ounces, agility 1. 2 ounces, dark attribute, fire weakness, slashing weakness, piercing immunity. The memories of the past flowed into his mind like water. Plant monsters had high vitality, but agility was often their weakness. Furthermore, the Thorn of Light was their natural nemesis. It was weak in fire and slashing, and the Thorn of Light was their natural nemesis. Unfortunately, he didn't have any on hand. He couldn't help but gnash his teeth and curse in his heart at the current situation. The only thing he could rely on now was his 1 ounce of agility. He did not intend to tangle with the opponent. But it seemed that the young rotten beast did not have the same thoughts as him. It made a rustling sound as it pounced towards him. Even though the rotten beast was in human form, it ran on all 4s. It looked like an uncivilized savage. Brando leaned to the side to avoid the opponent's claws. The thorn swept across his forehead and left a few bloody wounds. Luckily, it was not an undead, or else the decaying poison in his body would have worsened. But before he could rejoice, a line of green text appeared in his vision: emergency warning, paralyzing poison invasion. Damn it! I actually forgot about this. Brando almost cursed it out loud. Because he was level 20 and could basically sneak around the rotten beast's area, he actually forgot that this thing's attacks were poisonous. Even though it was the most insignificant paralyzing poison, when combined with the decaying poison in his body, it was still unbearable. But even if he cursed, he did not dare to be careless. He pressed his hands on the opponent's thorny claws and pushed. Then, he targeted the dark red rotten beast beside Freya and activated charge. It was actually an adult rotten beast. He could not help but take a deep breath. The strength of an adult rotten beast of 4.7 ounces was even higher than that of a gargoyle. Its level 1 strength was not to be trifled with. But it was a little strange. Logically speaking, if an adult rotten beast was there, Freya should have been dragged away. But no matter what, Brando used the force of the young rotten beast to fly out. He then completed a turn in mid-air and activated charge. His whole body suddenly sped up and crossed over the crisscrossing sharp rocks. It was like a black shadow that constantly connected on the rocks. The distance of tens of meters was covered in an instant. Let go of the backpack, Freya. But Freya desperately held on to the backpack and shook her head. She held onto a protruding rock with one hand and was almost unable to hold on. But Brando finally arrived first. Lower your head. He growled and pulled out the long sword on Freya's back. Then, he cut off the strap of the backpack that the adult rotten beast was holding on to. The dark red humanoid shrub immediately lost its center of gravity and fell backward. It tried to grab onto something to stabilize its balance, but Brando had already kicked it in the chest, causing it to roll into a deep crevice behind. The rotten beast was very light and would not die from the fall, but it would not be able to find a way back up in a short time. Seeing this scene, our protagonist heaved a sigh of relief. But when he turned around, his tone became abnormally stern. Do you want to die? Freya looked up at him with her bright eyes. She probably did not expect him to be so angry. She pursed her lips and stubbornly turned her head away. But Brando suddenly saw that her hands were scraped and covered in blood. He was stunned for a moment and did not have the heart to scold her anymore. Besides, the crisis was not over yet. He sighed and pulled her up. I have a lot of things to ask you, but let's talk about it later. The Roman is still waiting for us up there. Okay. Unfortunately, when Brando was about to turn around, he saw 2 golden lights flash into his chest. 2 EXP. He raised his head in shock. He saw a Roman holding her skirt in one hand and the elven sword in the other. The rotten beast from before had blocked her way. She had carefully pierced its heart with her sword and turned it into ashes. The merchant lady was also shocked. She did not expect the sword in her hand to be so powerful. "Why did you come down too?" Brando suddenly had the urge to beat her up. "But I thought about it seriously. Brando, I don't think I can protect myself." Brando was speechless for a moment. P.S. Tearfully begging to be recommended. Step by step, the front is still far away. Chapter 37. "You're going to scold me, aren't you, Brando?" "Nope, come over quickly. Be careful." Looking at the Roman's carefree expression, Brando could not help but feel annoyed and amused at the same time. But when he looked up, there were already 3 young rotten beasts on the rock that he and the Roman occupied. He looked around again, and the bush monsters had already surrounded them from all directions. After the undead army was wiped out, they became the only target in the canyon, especially the future merchant girl who was holding the glowing thorn of light. The magical weapon was like a candle in the dark, attracting the golden tree's servants. And it was indeed a candle in the dark. Brando could almost hear the golden demonic tree's thirst for magic screaming in his heart, but he did not dare to think about it. Time was of the essence, and they might encounter more demonic trees, so they had to leave this place before that happened. He turned back and asked Freya, "How is it, can you still hold on?" Freya nodded. "Then we'll go up from the other side. Take your sword and be careful," he said as he returned the girl's sword to her. Even though the rotten beasts had already occupied the high ground, there was not a single bush monster in the opposite direction. In fact, the speed of these animated plants was not fast, and their speed of climbing on the intersecting rocks was about the same as a normal person. But they had the advantage of numbers and familiarity with the terrain. They also had high vitality, and the corresponding endurance and toughness were outstanding. Brando knew that he had to think of a way to stop these monsters. He could not help but look up at the higher ground. Freya placed her bloodied hand on the rock wall and shrank back in pain. But she gritted her teeth, tore a piece of cloth from her sleeve and wrapped it around her hand, then grabbed the sharp rock and climbed up. Brando saw this scene from behind and could not help but sigh in his heart. But he did not have much time. He took the thorn of light from the Roman and protected her as they climbed up. When he turned back, there were already 2 young rotten beasts climbing up from below. "Brando, come up quickly." The Roman's voice rang out. Freya's face was pale from nervousness, and she immediately laid down on the rock and extended her hand to him. But Brando did not have the mind to respond. The 2 bush monsters did not have much intelligence, and they were already half standing up and hissing threateningly at the youth. In a sense, rotten beasts were not considered intelligent life forms, and were merely puppets of the golden demonic tree. Brando's swords, An's and his sword. But when he wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to grab the future goddess of war's hand, they growled and pounced towards him. To die. Brendel was enraged. He used his 1-ounce agility to push himself off the rock wall and flew over the back of the 2 monsters' heads. When his feet landed on the ground, his upper body was already in a standard attack stance. A horizontal slash. Freya let out an "ah" as she realized how far she was from Brando. Her talent was not outstanding, but her greatest pride was that she was more hardworking and focused on something than the average person. She was the best swordsman in Butchie's militia, but it did not mean that she was talented in swordsmanship, because most people did not notice the sweat and tears that Freya had put in. This was also why Martin admired her and made her the leader of the militia. But her swordsmanship foundation was only solid, but Brando's was more like 1,000 hammer blows. If she had to use a word to describe it, it would be clean and tidy. With one slash, a head fell without a single mistake. The rotten beast that lost its head emitted a ring of silver flames from its wound, and then it immediately turned into a ball of fire and fell to the ground. The other rotten beast let out a mournful cry and swung its claws. In fact, the rotten beast's claws were much longer than the average person could see, but they rarely showed this before they attacked. Many people hated it because of this, but it could not fool Brando. What a joke, he had already been tricked once in the game, how could he fall into the same trap again? Thus, he was already prepared for this. At this moment, he raised his sword to block, and the rotten beast's claws hit the thorn of light, creating a ball of silver sparks. The rotten beast screamed and retreated, but even though Brando was suspicious, how could he let go of such a good opportunity to attack? He shot forward like an arrow, the elven sword in his hand already drawing a striking silver line. In fact, he had done this kind of attack thousands of times in the game, so he was very familiar with it. But his attributes and skills were far from being able to keep up, which made him feel very awkward. Especially the timing of his attack, it was worlds apart. He thought that if it was an iron swordsman, it could easily dodge his attack, but the rotten beast's infant did not have that ability. The sword pierced through the rotten beast's throat. Boiling silver flames rose from both sides of the leaf-shaped sword, and in the blink of an eye, the rotten beast was turned into a pile of ashes. 6 golden balls of light danced in the night sky, and then merged into Brando's chest. To be honest, the purification effect on the undead and dark creatures was beyond Brando's imagination, but he had never seen anything similar in the game, so there was no way to compare it. Brando, you are so powerful. Roman was stunned. Freya was even more stunned, and she was speechless. She originally believed that Brando was Bragg's militia. But now that she thought about it, this young man must have been lying to her. She was not stupid, how could a militia be so powerful? But in fact, she and Roman swordsmanship had not been initiated, so they did not understand that the true standard of a swordsman was judged by the balance of speed, strength, and skill. In fact, Brando's speed and strength were still far from being a swordsman. But in terms of skill, because of his past experience, he could use many skills that low-level swordsmen would not even think of. But this was actually meaningless, because many skills did not have the corresponding level of strength to support them, and were actually just a frame. For example, he took advantage of the rotten beast's low agility when he leaped into the air. If he was facing other people, he would definitely not use this move casually. What a joke, before elemental activation, wouldn't he be a target in the air? But Brando was not in the mood to enjoy the surprise of the two beauties. He had already noticed that more rotten beasts were climbing up. He hurriedly gestured to Freya and Roman to continue climbing, and he subconsciously glanced at the 2 piles of ashes of the rotten beasts. It was like an instinctive glance in the game, and it was funny, he just wanted to see if there was any equipment dropped. But of course, there was no equipment. It seemed that there were some differences between the game and the rotten beasts. Didn't they drop 1 to 2 copper coins? He could not help but shake his head, turned around, and grabbed the rock wall to climb up. The agility of a rotten beast's larva was 1.2 ounces. Although the adult rotten beast's strength and vitality were far superior to monsters of the same level, its agility was even lower, only 2/3 of that of a larva. Brando had 2.1 ounce, and Freya, as a trained militia, would not be lower than 1.2 ounces. Among the 3 of them, only Roman was slightly worse, but with Brando and Freya's help, their speed was not much slower. Thus, the 3 of them climbed up the sharp rocks and gradually pulled away from the bush monsters. But the latter's endurance was invincible, and they persevered, one chasing and one escaping for a few minutes. At this moment, the advantage of the physique came into play. Other than Brendel, who was able to maintain his composure, Freya was already panting slightly. As for Roman, her small face was already as white as paper, but when Brando said that he wanted to carry her, she would not let him. Brando could not help but look back. The monsters were about a few dozen meters behind them. Fortunately, their intelligence was not enough to support them in front, or else they would have been done for. But even so, they could not continue like this, and it was only a matter of time before they were caught up. The rotten beast larva's 3-ounce constitution was higher than Brando's. He could not help but look up at the cliff in the distance. Fortunately, it was not far away. But at this time, Roman was out of breath as she shouted, "Brando, look over there." Our protagonist subconsciously turned his head and squinted his eyes. He saw a giant rotten beast about the height of 3 people, and it walked as if it was flying, coming out from a crack in the rocks and appearing in front of them. What the hell? This was an elite, it was the patrol leader. If he encountered such a thing in the game, Brando would probably be happy for half a day, but now he only had the urge to curse. This thing was a mutated version of the rotten beast that had shared the blood of the golden tree. Not only was its vitality and strength outstanding, but its agility of 1.7 ounces was also not inferior. Freya, Roman, go to the cliff. There are hooks in the backpack. As long as we find a way to climb up, these low-level magic servants will not be able to catch up. He decisively took off his backpack and threw it to Roman. He was the only man here, so of course he had to take the responsibility of bringing up the rear. In the game, although male and female players were equal, as a basic network etiquette, most of the time, the male character would take the initiative to bring up the rear. Therefore, Brando made a decision without thinking. "I'll go with you," Freya said. Brando glanced at her and saw the seriousness on this future goddess of war's face. He knew that he could not persuade her, so he could only nod. However, this was also because he really needed a helper. At least Freya could fulfill this role well, and not the Roman who slacked off in the militia training and was determined to be a merchant. "Roman, go quickly. We're counting on you now." "Yes, Brando." Romaine obviously understood. She hugged Brando's backpack and nodded desperately, then turned and ran in that direction. The elite rotten beast arrived in front of them in a few leaps, and the horde of rotten beasts was still about 40 meters away. Brando and Freya looked at each other and estimated that they had about 30 seconds to end this battle. This thing's claws are 3 meters long. Pay attention to its attack range. Let's stand apart. Also, it will shoot out the thorns on its body. The thorns are poisonous, so make sure to avoid the front. Freya nervously clenched her sword and took a deep breath. Although she did not know how Brando knew this, she knew that he would not lie to her. However, he also knew that the other party wouldn't lie to him, so he tried his best to keep calm and nodded. Brando clenched his fists and felt a little stiff. The numbing poison from before had begun to take effect. He opened the interface and saw that his dexterity had dropped by 0.1 ounce. However, he could not help but look at the elite rotten beast and sigh. In the game, the elite rotten beast would only drop money as the patrol leader. 10 silver coins, would it not be that there were no benefits here? Thinking about it, it did not seem impossible. P.S. So few favorites, please add. So few recommendations, please recommend. So few clicks, please click. All kinds of data are so little, please roll and beg. Chapter 38. The giant rotten beast raised its claw, which was almost half the height of a human, and slapped down. Brando ducked to avoid it. The wind stirred up by the twig swept past his head like a blade and hit a piece of rock. With a boom, the rock was sent flying 20 to 30 meters away. Brando watched as the rock changed direction 3 times in the air and finally got stuck in a pile of sharp rocks, raising a cloud of dust. He couldn't help but be shocked. This power was too frightening. If a person was hit like this, all the bones in their body would shatter due to the impact. The broken bones would pierce into the organs, and the organs would be crushed due to the pressure, causing a large amount of internal bleeding. To put it simply, it would be an instant kill. The elite rotten beast's 8.9-ounce strength was close to the peak of monsters below level 20. In Brando's memory, at this level, other than berserkers and dwarven iron sentinels, there were no other classes that could compare to it in terms of strength. However, he didn't plan to fight it head-on. He let Freya cover him from the side, and then used his advantage of agility to roll in and cut off the tree fork's left leg with the Thorn of Light. The giant bush monster was about 5 meters tall, and its claws were 3 meters long. Its attack range was very wide, but when it lowered its head, it found that it was difficult to attack Brando. Brando slashed with his sword, and the bright purification fire only left a burn mark on the monster's leg. The defense of the elite rotten beast made him break out in cold sweat. The elite rotten beast's constitution was high, and its toughness and resistance were not low, but it was definitely not this high. This meant that there was still a difference in strength between him and the monster. This was a setting in the Amber Sword, and he didn't expect it to exist here as well. However, the sword still hurt the rotten beast so much that it raised its head and let out a long howl. It was a buzzing sound, and the huge sound wave made the nearby weeds rustle. Brando felt a tightness in his chest, and Freya, who was not far away, coughed up blood. The effect of the roar of deterrence was not so obvious in the game. Was it because their levels were too low? Brando only felt that his internal organs were about to shift positions. The data on his retina showed that some of his organs had been damaged to varying degrees. Brando! Romaine's voice came from not far away. Brando turned around and found that she had already tied the rope and fixed the hook. He couldn't help but feel gratified. At critical moments, the Roman was still reliable. She was calm in the face of major events. She did have the potential to be a businesswoman. He looked in another direction. The rotten beast larvae were getting closer and closer. It was time to retreat. There were only a few seconds left. Freya, he shouted immediately. I'm fine, cough, cough. The ponytailed girl stubbornly wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth, picked up her sword, and once again assumed a defensive posture. This is the last attack. Cover me and get me out of its attack range. Freya nodded and held her sword with both hands. She followed the training rules and yelled as she attacked from the side. The giant shrubbery monster was about to step on Brando, but at this time, it had to pay attention to the other side. With its intelligence, it was difficult to understand which side was more difficult to deal with, but from an animal's instinct, Freya looked more imposing. So it immediately spread out the branches on its body and shot countless thorns at Freya. The future goddess of war had been on guard against this move since Brando reminded her. She immediately used her hands to protect her head, chest, and other important parts. Although the thorns still hit her and sent her flying back to the side, causing her to bleed, she gritted her teeth and felt gratified. At least she had bought some time for Brando. Brando did not have time to care about Freya's injuries. Once he was out of the shrubbery monster's attack range, he immediately squatted down and raised the shiny silver ring on his right hand to aim at the monster's injured left foot. OSS. The air was stifled, and the explosive wind pressure hit the elite rotten beast's left leg with a bang. Wood splinters flew everywhere, and a small part of its body exploded. The broken wood splinters and leaves were thrown far away like flowers scattered by a goddess. No matter how high the monster's defense was, it could not withstand a 20-ounce attack. After losing its left leg, it lost its balance and fell backward. Brando immediately used charge and jumped under the monster before it fell. He knew that it was not completely dead yet. The elite rotten beast had 42 HP. Although it was not as high as the gargoyle, it was not far behind. He raised the Thorn of Light, and with a light cracking sound, the sword in his hand pierced into the monster's neck. The elite rotten beast howled in pain and wanted to resist, but Brendel twisted his sword and a bright silver flame shot out from the blade. The rotten beast finally lowered its head weakly, and its life was slowly fading away. The flame of purification lost the suppression of the monster's HP and tenacity. It instantly surged and turned into a huge burning fireball. Then, countless golden lights flew out from the huge fireball and merged into Brando's body. 17 EXP. He suddenly felt a chill in his palm and subconsciously opened his palm. He found a black smoke coming out from the shrubbery monster and gathering in his palm. The smoke gradually solidified and formed a cold black crystal. A soul crystal. Brando did not expect this to appear here. He was shocked, but then he was pleasantly surprised. The power of the soul was the purest energy in the world. It was not only used by the necromancers of Madara, but also by the wizards of other schools. In the game, the soul crystal could be converted into EXP for the character through a ritual. It could also be used to activate some items and recharge some magic equipment. For example, the Ring of the Wind Empress. This soul crystal seemed to contain at least 30 EXP. It was enough to recharge the Ring of the Wind Empress once and still have some left. How could Brando not be happy? He originally thought that he would have to use the Ring of the Wind Empress in advance because of an unexpected situation. He could only find a safe place to hide for 3 hours before continuing on. Without the Ring of the Wind Empress, he did not dare to run around in this valley. But no matter what, 3 hours of time had been wasted. But he did not expect that there would be a turning point. He put away his sword and looked back. He found that the nearest rotten beast had already climbed up the platform. He could not help but be shocked. At this time, he and Freya were both exhausted. They could not afford another fierce battle. It would be fine if it was just one of them, but it would be troublesome if they were entangled. On the other side, Freya, who was covered in wounds, was originally relieved when she saw Brando kill the giant bush monster. But when she saw the thorny monsters appear on the other side of the platform, she could not help but worry again. The young girl frowned and struggled to stand up. But she saw Brando striding over. He did not give her a chance to resist and carried her in his arms, running towards the Roman. Ah! Put me down. This future goddess of war was now just a girl from the countryside of Butchie. Her face was boiling hot. She struggled for a while, but Brando did not listen to her. She could only turn her red face to the side and quietly let him carry her. When they reached the bottom of the cliff, the Roman had already climbed up. This future merchant girl was not a timid girl. She was decisive, but Brando did not doubt that if he and Freya could not climb up, she would climb down alone. More and more rotten beasts were climbing up. He only had a few more seconds. He tied the rope around Freya's body, then wrapped it around his own waist. He felt the girl in his arms tensing up, but he did not care too much about it. Fortunately, the experience was enough for him to level up and raise, mercenary soldier, to level 3. His strength was 2.5 ounces, and it was enough for him to pull 2 people up with one hand. At that critical moment, a rotten beast jumped up and grabbed his leg. But Brando's reaction was faster. He stabbed his sword straight down and swept it back into the pile of monsters. The 3 of them climbed up the cliff and sighed in relief at the same time. Brando saw that the bush monsters below were grabbing the rope and trying to climb up. He did not hold back and cut the rope to let them fall back down. He still had a lot of rope anyway, as long as the claws were preserved. Brando knew that the cliff was a few thousand meters long. If the golden demonic tree servants wanted to cause trouble for him, they would have to go around to another valley. He still had time, so he could not help but sit down and let out a long sigh. Good job. He could not help but give the Roman a thumbs up. The merchant girl's performance was too good. That Brando really picked up a treasure. Really? Auntie always says the same thing. Little Roman, you're the best. The merchant girl could not help but puff out her chest. She was a little proud, but her concerned gaze immediately fell on Freya. Brando knew that she was worried about her friend's injuries, so he replied, "Don't worry, it's just a superficial wound. Find a safe place to clean it up and bandage it, and it will be fine." Freya's face was still red, and she was too embarrassed to answer. But now that Brando had finally caught his breath, he looked at the future goddess of war and could not help but feel a little annoyed. He had originally wondered how this future Valkyrie had managed to survive such a tragic war. Was it because of her strength, calmness, and other precious qualities? The Freya of the past did give him such an impression. Although she was a little naive, she had a calmness that normal people did not have. Perhaps she had other reasons for coming here, but the fact that she refused to let go of the backpack made Brando unhappy. Freya was too stubborn. Perhaps it was because of her stubbornness that she had such a strong personality, but it was not a good thing on the battlefield. "Why are you here?" But since they were companions, Brando did not want to hurt her feelings. He thought for a moment and asked in a gentle tone. Freya was silent for a moment and took off a ring from her finger. "This is the guard captain's seal ring. Go to Fortress Reedon to report this. Uncle told me to bring this to you." Brando slapped his forehead. It was not that he had forgotten about this. In fact, he knew that the chances of him being valued in Fortress Reedon was not high. Freya and the other militia did not know, but how could a veteran like Martin not know? If the nobles of Fortress Reedon had valued the defense of Bucci, it would not have led to this situation. The main reason he went to Fortress Reedon was because of his Roman aunt, but he did not expect Martin to be moved by his actions and actually send the seal ring over. This was also his negligence. If he had expected this, he would have directly rejected the offer. After all, this ring was very useful to the refugees. "You asked to come, right?" But Brando thought for a moment and felt that with the veteran's personality, he would not send Freya to her death even if the seal ring was very important. The girl tidied up her ponytail and nodded. "Why?" "Brando, you are not from Bucci. What excuse do I have to escape? I am the captain of the 3rd squad, so I have to set an example." Freya raised her head and replied. "What's in the backpack?" The future Valkyrie lowered her head and hugged her backpack, but hesitated for a moment. P.S. Begging for votes weekly, looking at the collection, tears flowing. Chapter 39. Half-body armor of the Wind Empress. Brando opened the heavy backpack and took a look. When he saw the bronze armor neatly placed inside, he couldn't help but facepalm. No wonder the adult rotten beast could only restrain Freya. It was because of the protection of this thing. "Why didn't you wear it? The armor is glowing." "I was afraid that the undead of Madara would see it. I plan to wait for the day when the light is brighter." "Light?" "It's the layer of cyan light that surrounds the armor," Limu said. "That's the feather of the wind, not light." Brando saw Freya looking at him with a puzzled expression and couldn't help but sigh. This was the most basic knowledge in the game, but he didn't expect Freya to not know anything about it. He could only pick up the armor and explain it to her. The half-body armor of the Wind Empress was the work of Saint Orso. Just like his ring of the Wind Empress, it had the sacred Wind Empress pattern on it. However, there were different types of sacred Wind Empress pattern. For example, the ring of the Wind Empress was Delu's keepsake, and the sacred Wind Empress pattern on it was Saint Orso's national emblem. However, the one in Brando's hand was a fake, so it was also a very low-grade item. It might have been the work of a human wizard. Of course, although it was clumsy, a 20-ounce magic equipment wasn't something that Brando's grandfather should have. Regarding this mystery, his memory couldn't provide any help, so he could only put it aside for the time being. However, according to the game's logic, this might be a hidden mission line, but he could only find some clues when he met the cripple from Black Pepper Alley. On the other hand, the real St. Orso's sacred Wind Empress pattern must have come from the hands of the elves. The half-body armor of the Wind Empress was the military equipment of the Elven Guards, so it was naturally pure. However, since the year of the Return of the Light, there were hundreds of sets that flowed into other countries every year, so it wasn't particularly precious. If it was Brando, it would only be a 15-ounce strength equipment in the game. The Feather of the Wind was the sacred Wind Empress pattern that was added to the half-body armor of the Wind Empress pattern. It was actually a spell, and its effect was to reduce the force that passed through it. In other words, it reduced damage. Just like the usual style of the elves, this spell was especially sensitive to plants, so it was normal for the rotten beasts to be severely restricted. What Freya did not know was that the Feather of the Wind was a buff in the game, and its light could only be seen by the enemy when it was in effect. After listening to Brando's explanation, Freya looked embarrassed. It was too embarrassing. She was like a country girl who had never seen the world. She couldn't help but lower her head further and further. In the end, she grumbled in a low voice, "Why didn't you say so earlier?" Brando thought to himself, "How would I know, my young miss?" Of course, he subconsciously treated some things as common sense. He also thought that this might cause some misunderstandings, but after being immersed in the Amber Sword for so long, it was normal for him to find it difficult to adjust his identity as a player. When he saw Freya's flushed face and how she hugged the backpack tightly, he didn't even need to ask to know why she wouldn't throw the backpack away. So even the future goddess of war had her own feelings. He did not directly point it out, but it felt good to be trusted by someone. Brando's heart inevitably softened, and he naturally could not reprimand her. Things are dead, but people are alive. No matter how precious this thing is, you must ensure your own safety the next time you encounter such a situation, understand? He said. I'm sorry. Then what about the third team? I entrusted the team leader to Petit Finus. Petit Finus? Yes, Uncle Martin once told me that this child might be the most promising person in Butchie to walk out of this place. I used to take good care of him, hoping that one day he would be able to fight for our village. But I think you're right, how can a man grow up without training? You've thought it through, does Irene agree? Brando sighed. Freya finally walked out of her world. He previously thought that this girl was still holding on to her innocence and childishness, but after seeing her steady and bright eyes, he understood that she had grown up. Irene and I have the same thoughts. Brando nodded. After solving the internal problems of the team, he let out a sigh of relief. Fortunately, it was not a big problem. Although Freya was a little stubborn and shy, she was still a reliable companion in crucial moments. Especially when she did not throw away the backpack at the most critical moment. Although it made Brando angry, it also made him feel warm. At least this friendship was heavy. He could not help but turn around, and found that the Roman was looking at the shelter from the wind with sparkling eyes across the bonfire, as if she was looking at a rare treasure. It was as if the merchant girl would never be worried about her surroundings. Brando, how did you know about this place? If we're in this position, those terrifying monsters outside shouldn't be able to find us, right? She asked. Freya nodded, but we can't hide here forever. Let's wait for the sky to brighten a little before we leave. Brando also nodded. Both of them were right. There were a few such hidden terrains in the Zavale mountain path, and they were all on one side of the cliff. Back then, who knew how many nightingales and hunters had sacrificed their lives to find this small path, which allowed them to easily avoid most of the golden demonic tree servants in the valley and get close to the boss. But there were two difficulties. First, they had to go all the way from the cliff to the core of the Zavale mountain path where the golden demonic tree had taken root, which was also the so-called Forbidden Orchard. There were a few cuts that required the use of ropes. Moreover, the golden demonic tree was not stupid. There were several demonic tree patrols on the cliff, but Brando had his own ways to deal with them. The second difficulty was to secretly leave the secret passage behind the forbidden orchard, which required Griffin's crystal key. But that thing was hanging on the branch of the golden demonic tree. In the past, they had just killed the boss and left with it, but this time, Brando had to find another way. He had already roughly thought of the steps, and the rest was just improvising. After all, not everyone could think of a perfect plan. Most of the plans they made in the game were just outlines, and those that only existed in novels did not exist in reality. At this time, the trump card in his hand was especially important. This was why Brando valued the Ring of the Wind Empress so much. Thinking of this, he could not help but take out the soul crystal and examine it under the light of the fire. The dark soul crystal looked like obsidian, but wizards could distinguish the two by injecting power. Even ordinary people could tell the difference if they were familiar enough. But Brando knew a simple way to test it. He put the crystal close to the fire and saw that the dark crystal showed signs of vaporization. He immediately recognized that it was a soul crystal. This was because the lack of protection of the soul's power was extremely unstable in front of an open fire. This also explained why the low-level undead in Madara were so afraid of fire. "What is that?" Romaine asked curiously. Brando put the crystal on the Ring of the Wind Empress. The crystal dimmed slightly, and then became a little transparent. He thought for a moment, and only injected 10 ounces of power. This was enough, and it would be a waste to add more. But then he thought of his gargoyle statue, and the power contained in the soul crystal was the best medium to repair this amulet. But after hesitating for a moment, he gave up after putting the crystal on the ring. The gargoyle amulet had more than 300 possible control spells. He had spent half the night trying to guess half of them, and he did not have time to continue experimenting. Besides, the remaining 20 EXP was just a drop in the bucket, and it would be a waste to use it. Brando thought for a moment, and it would take at least 100 EXP to completely repair this thing. What else could this thing be used for? Or was it waiting for other uses? But for the current Brando, only used EXP was useful EXP. His power was still too weak, and he urgently needed to become stronger. Only by living on could he change. Should he use it for himself? Or use it as skill EXP? It was not enough for him to level up to the next level. Not to mention that the exchange of 10 EXP was too ugly, and he did not have any skills to train in under the current mercenaries. He could not continue to level up the militia, right? That would have to wait until he had enough EXP. Brando suddenly felt that he was in a dilemma, and he could not help but look at the sky outside. After dawn, the sky quickly became bright, and they were about to leave. The golden demonic tree's magic servants were all blind, and they instinctively followed the light. They were also sensitive to sound and magic waves, so there was no difference between traveling during the day and at night. It was just that compared to humans, it was more convenient during the day. At least they did not have to use torches, as they were too sensitive to rotten beasts. His hand continued to fumble in his pocket to see if there was anything else that could be of use, but he soon came across the card that looked like a card. Brando's heart skipped a beat, and he subconsciously picked it up. He did not know what it was, but it did not stop him from experimenting. The best way to appraise an item was, of course, to have a complete set of information and alchemy tools. Players did not look for NPCs that professionally. But even in the game, the appraisal fee was not cheap, and one of the features of the Amber Sword was that even if you did not know the attributes of the item, you could still use it, as long as you knew how to use it. Therefore, many players figured out their own set of methods to appraise equipment, and Brando was no exception. He experimented with a few commonly used spells, but unfortunately, there was no reaction. He thought for a moment, and subconsciously touched the soul crystal to the piece of paper to see if there was any reaction. Generally speaking, magic items would resonate with the power of the soul, and if it was broken or could be recharged, it would even produce a higher level of reaction. But what Brando did not expect was that just as he touched the piece of paper suddenly produced a strong light, and the soul crystal in his hand faded in an instant, turning into a transparent crystal prism. Absorption reaction. Brando almost jumped up in shock. He looked at the transparent crystal prism in his hand and was speechless. A soul crystal that had lost its power of the soul was called a container. Wizards and elementalists would buy such containers at a high price to make storage items. It was similar to a scroll in this world. But that was not what Brando was concerned about. He only felt a bone-piercing chill rise up from his back. Absorption reaction was one of the few magic waves that were the strongest. This time, he was in big trouble. He estimated that the golden demonic tree could feel the magic wave spreading from the air even if it was 10 miles away. Maybe it was not just the golden demonic tree. With such a strong reaction, who knew what strange things nearby would be targeting him? But what Brando did not understand was, how could such a low-level magic item have an absorption reaction? That was the privilege of magic items that were at least 40 ounces and above. No matter how surprised Roman and Freya looked at him, they certainly saw the dazzling black light. Brando made a prompt decision, stood up and said, "Let's go, let's get out of here, P.S. Thank you all for your support. Thank you Brother Blade. Continue to ask for votes. Welcome to Chidian Chinese website, the newest, fastest, and most popular series are all at Chidian Originals. Chapter 40. Roman and Freya extinguished the bonfire and followed Brando out. They guessed that Brando's change might have something to do with the glaring black light from before, but they didn't even know how the black light was produced. Only the future Romaine had seen the soul crystal on Brando's hand, and she also knew that he had a very magical ring that could summon the wind to kill his enemies. That's right, he also gave her a ring. Roman especially liked the black and white spider silk patterns on the ring. In Butchie, or rather in the entire world of light, it was not common to use spider silk as decorations, but the rarer it was, the more she cherished it. She just didn't know if the ring had the same magical power. This was a side of Brando that she didn't know. The future Romaine was full of curiosity as she looked at the back of the young man standing in the valley in the early morning. She only felt that everything with Brando was full of mysteries and secrets. Brando, what happened? Compared to Roman's nonchalant attitude, Freya was more serious. This girl with a long ponytail thought that her responsibility was to share some of Brando's worries. Nothing big, but we should leave this place as soon as possible. Brando suppressed the uneasiness in his heart and said. He pulled out the elven sword, and the barren rocks reflected a dim light. To be honest, he really didn't know how to explain the magic absorption reaction to Freya and Roman. In short, it was a spontaneous action of high-grade magic items to steal low-grade energy. But magic items below 40 ounces of strength would rarely have such a reaction. But no matter what, he couldn't explain these professional terms to Freya and Roman in such a short time. Freya looked at him worriedly, but didn't ask any more questions. Brando looked down at the valley. There was no movement below, but he still felt insecure. He could only let Freya put on the armor and let Roman prepare the hook. Freya, on the other hand, was already wearing the half-plate of the Wind Empress, and she could just put it on. But she did not have any professional training, and her speed was not a factor. Roman was nervous and a little excited. She wanted to help, but she was afraid of being scolded by Freya. Although she and Freya were close friends, the ponytailed girl was merciless when she got angry. Moreover, she knew that she would only make things worse if she helped. Brando wasn't in a hurry, but he was more worried that the strong magic ripples would cause the monsters in the valley. That would be interesting. At the thought of this, he couldn't help but raise the card in his hand in shock. He didn't expect that the most important item in the Gironda wasn't the Thorn of Light, but this card. A magic item with 40 ounces of strength and above. What kind of concept was that? He remembered that he only saw it for the first time in the 5th year of the game. In the long Chaos era, human and elven sorcerers couldn't solve the problem of how to inject the second level of power into magic items. And this problem was solved by a genius in the twilight of the moon, Chaos 471. This genius was Tumen, the Elemental Emperor. Tumen's invention of the sacred rune engraving technology completely solved the problem of instilling the second level of power into magic items. It was only until then that it was possible to create magic items with 40 ounces of strength and above. Brando didn't doubt that the mysterious pattern on the back of the card was the sacred rune. It was just that he had never seen such a complicated sacred rune. It wasn't the Wind Empress rune of the elves, nor the Fire God rune of the Cruz people. As for the Sea King rune of the Alanta, although he wasn't familiar with it, it definitely wasn't like this. He stared at the complicated pattern and couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. The skills passed down by Tumen had been revolutionary for nearly 1,000 years. Logically speaking, it was impossible for the sacred runes of the modern era to have such a complicated pattern. Unless this was an ancient artifact. But just as he was wondering, the card in his hand suddenly floated up without any warning and shot a black beam of light into the gray sky. Not long after, another beam of light shot up into the sky from the southeast mountains. Resonance. Brando didn't have time to react and could only watch the scene unfold in a daze. He was about to go crazy because the magic reaction this time was even bigger. He estimated that the Madara army that was more than 10 miles away should be alarmed. The only thing that could produce a resonance reaction was a part of the set. Brando didn't expect that the card in his hand was a set, and there was a resonance set in the Zavale mountain path. And what was worse was that they were in the resonance range. Brando, what's the matter? Roman and Freya spoke at the same time. This time, even if they were fools, they knew that there was something wrong with the card in Brando's hand. I'll explain it to you later. Have you put on your armor? Brando took one last look at the valley below and asked in an urgent tone. Freya nodded. The strong magic reaction had already caused the shadows of the magic servants to appear in the valley. Brando saw a few young rotten beasts passing through the dry valley below. He didn't dare to delay and immediately ordered Roman and Freya to throw away as much weight as possible and head east along the cliff. Dry food and water were important reserves, but they couldn't be used at this time. Brando only carried the basic equipment and a few rolls of rope. Each of them kept a torch and threw away the other necessary weights. They had to race against time. Along the way, more and more rotten beasts gathered at the bottom of the valley. It was as if the entire Zavale mountain path was boiling. Brando couldn't help but shudder when he saw the situation below. It really was a monster riot. However, he was on the cliff and the first batch of monsters would take at least 10 minutes to reach their previous campsite. Even if a few rotten beasts saw them from below, their numbers were nothing to worry about. Brando was really worried that the route of the demonic tree patrol on the eastern cliff would be changed because of this sudden change. Therefore, he had to reach the center of the valley before the golden demonic tree heirs arrived. Only there would he be able to kill the first patrol team. He knew that the patrol team should have just passed by the river. Even if they turned back immediately, it would take them 2 hours to reach the center of the valley. In order to farm the heart of the golden demonic tree, he had come to this dungeon countless times. Every movement was imprinted in his memory. The only thing he was worried about was the difference between reality and the game. Fortunately, they arrived there just a little bit earlier than the rest of the group. The three of them saw a group of monsters covered in vines rushing from the east. Both sides had discovered each other at almost the same time. The demonic trees were about half the height of a human when they stood up. Their bodies were wrapped in root-like vines. They didn't have eyes, but the membrane-like organs on their limbs allowed them to capture all the details of sound. They were also divided into two types, adult and juvenile. Adult demonic trees were very agile and could run through the valley like it was flat ground. They were also good at climbing and were the biggest threat in Brando's heart. However, there was only one adult demonic tree in this group of 10, which matched his memory. Let's hurry to the top of the mountain before they do. Brando saw the demonic trees getting closer and closer and his hands were sweating. There was a huge rock at the top of the mountain. In the game, they could use explosives to loosen it and roll it down to kill the patrolling demonic trees and block the valley. Of course, Brando didn't have any explosives in his hands right now, and he couldn't find any at the moment. However, he had the Ring of the Wind Empress, which was much more powerful than explosives. He looked at the small platform at the top of the mountain and couldn't help but sigh. If it was in the past, he could easily rush there before the adult demonic trees. However, because of the paralysis poison, his dexterity had dropped by 0.3 energy rank. He could only rely on Freya and Roman. Although the two girls didn't understand what Brando was thinking, they still nodded their heads hard. At this critical moment, although Brando didn't say anything, they knew that the monsters in front of them weren't to be trifled with. Both sides were in a hurry. Freya and Brando were slightly better, but Roman, whose body was slightly weaker, had a pale face and was almost out of breath. Fortunately, because of the time advantage, they reached the top of the mountain first. However, they were only one step ahead. Brando and Freya had just climbed up when the adult demonic trees appeared. It was a level 22 monster. Brando didn't need to think to know that the chances of winning were 0. However, even if the chances of winning were negative, they still had to go. They couldn't just sit there and wait for death, right? Brando immediately threw the Ring of the Wind Empress to Freya and shouted, "Attack the joint between the rocks and knock it down. The password is OSS. Do you understand?" Freya subconsciously caught the ring and was startled. "Brando. Bring it to the index finger. I'll stall this monster. Hurry up." Brando originally wanted to let Roman do it. At least he could save someone to protect himself. However, when he turned around, he saw that Romain was still far behind. This was the consequence of being lazy. He couldn't help but shake his head. Turning around, Brando took a deep breath. He was so nervous that his body stiffened. Although he appeared calm in front of Freya, it didn't mean that he wasn't afraid. The demonic trees weren't rotten beasts. They had solid level 1 strength. After losing the Ring of the Wind Empress, he found it hard to believe that he could fight against them. 5 energy rank strength, 6 energy rank vitality, 2 energy rank dexterity. High defense and toughness. Skin has corrosive poison. Good at long-range attacks. Has binding ability. Weak fire. Weak slashing. Brando calmed down and remembered the attributes of his opponent. Just from the data, this adult demonic tree wasn't too different from an elite rotten beast. However, he knew that the difference between the two of them was like heaven and earth. Just as Brando thought of this, the vines on the demonic tree's body seemed to have come alive. Countless vines flew towards him. He was so scared that he hurriedly rolled to the side to dodge. The vines that looked soft before were now like steel cables piercing into the rock. The surface of the rock immediately emitted a sizzling sound and started to emit white smoke. Corrosive. This was the scariest thing about the demonic trees. Normal swords wouldn't be able to hurt them at all. Instead, they would be damaged by their corrosive skin. The demonic tree heard the sound and knew that it missed. It immediately swung its vines to the side and the vine whip swept towards Brando. The latter cursed in his heart, but he could only continue to roll to dodge. The steel cable swept across the ground, causing rocks to fly everywhere. The flying rocks hit Brando's eyebrows, causing blood to flow from his forehead. However, he didn't dare to cry out in pain. He grabbed the thorn of light and pounced towards the demonic tree while it was attacking. However, at this moment, he was stunned. He saw a row of green words appear on his retina. Do you want to summon, Holy Sword? P.S. Everyone, please don't urge me to update. Especially those that cost 12,000. That's a complete waste of money. I support everyone's tipping. At @_carrot@, please recommend me to your collection. Chapter 41. Summon the Holy Sword. There were many treasured swords in Vaunt that were given the title of Holy Sword, such as the Wind Crown, Nordis, the Sword of the Endless Sky, the Holy Sword of the Mountains, Extremis, and the only holy sword that was obtained by a player back then, Amber. However, Brando thought that these legendary names had nothing to do with him. Was this a spell? He knew that the priests had a low-level light spell called Holy Sword, but that spell had a string of pure offensive spells that had nothing to do with summoning or summoning. In the game, magic words were very serious and couldn't be changed or matched. However, regardless of what this Holy Sword summon was, according to Brando's knowledge, any spells used by the players in the game didn't have any negative effects. The most serious consequence was that the player's mental strength would be overdrawn, but it wouldn't cause a splitting headache. At most, the player would feel a little tired. Thus, when he thought of this, he calmed down and gave the order to summon the Holy Sword. After all, anyone would do a business that wouldn't lose money. Moreover, he didn't have the hope that this was a last resort. Brando slowed down a little, and the demonic tree had already controlled 2 snake vines to attack him. However, he immediately lowered his body and waved his sword upwards. With a silver arc, the 2 rotten snake vines flew into the air and turned into ashes. Then, our protagonist's attack didn't slow down. With one hand on the ground, his whole body accelerated and entered the demonic tree's range. However, when he was about to take the next step, the screen projected on his retina changed. Warrior's Path, unlocked. Heroic Card Deck, Chapter 2, Knight, Holy Sword. As this is the first time the character has activated the Destiny card deck, the guide system is loading. Lines of ghostly words appeared and quickly disappeared. Holy Sword, the symbol of knight's devotion and sword of purity. Effect, pay 6 Earth EP from the elemental pool to summon the Holy Sword. Summoning conditions have been met. Please display the card, place your thumb on the center of the sacred rune of destiny, and use your index finger and thumb to form a magic triangle to ignite the Holy Sword. Brando immediately found himself unable to attack due to the interference of these messy things. His hands paused for a moment, and he was forced back by the demonic tree's vines. He cursed in his heart, but he knew that even if he wasn't disturbed, his chances of success weren't high. Brando could not help but gasp for breath. He turned back to look at Freya. The girl was struggling all the way to the bottom of the giant rock. She was not far away, but her light brown ponytail was bobbing up and down behind her back. His attention then turned to another direction. The other demon tree younglings below were still a step behind. It seemed like the future Valkyrie would be fine. However, things were not looking good for the Roman either. She could no longer crawl and was gasping for air. On the other hand, Brando had already exchanged a blow with the demonic tree. Both sides didn't gain much of an advantage, but the golden demonic tree's descendant discovered that the human in front of it wasn't as powerful as it imagined. It was only afraid of the elven treasure sword in his hand. Brando was well aware of this. He once again clenched his sword, but at this time, a prompt flashed in his vision: display card. Brando was stunned, but he was an experienced player after all, so he immediately thought of the card in his bosom. As if he had an epiphany, he immediately took out the card. So this sacred rune was called the Sacred Rune of Fate, but why hadn't he heard of it before? Brando couldn't help but have some doubts in his heart, but he had already put his thumb on it. Heroic Card Deck, Chapter 2, Knight, Sacred Sword, successfully locked on. A dazzling black light shot out. The penetrating magic wave was like a sharp sword piercing into the brain of every creature nearby. Not only did the adult demonic tree couldn't help but howl, but even Freya and Roman stopped under the influence of the heart throbbing. One of them turned back and the other raised their head to look at Brando. They saw the card in Brando's hand disappear after a wave of black waves. Brando, the card in your hand disappeared. Romaine anxiously shouted. Her eyes were really good, from where she stood to where Brando was at least 50 meters away. But Brendel turned a deaf ear to the future merchant girl's words, because he could only stare blankly at the new information that appeared on his retina. Sacred sword, the symbol of the knight's devotion and sword of purity. When it is on the field, pay 1 Earth EP to attack the enemy, or pay 1 Earth EP to dispel diseases, curses, and dark effects. For every 10 minutes the sacred sword is on the field, the character needs to pay 2 Earth EP and 2 Spirit to maintain it. The sacred sword's range of effect is 1,000 meters. Ha! What kind of evil witchcraft is this? Brando had never heard of a magic item that required the player to continuously pay energy to use it. Spirit didn't need to be explained, it was only related to one's willpower. But he knew about this elemental pool. In his impression, only elementalists, spellblades, and Sun Knight classes had elemental pools, because they needed to draw on elemental energy to cast spells. But there had never been a magic item that required the player's elemental pool. Didn't that mean that the player couldn't use it without an elemental pool? And the most important thing was that it required continuous consumption. This meant that if he wanted to use the soul crystals to charge the card, he would have to ensure that he had enough soul crystals in his hands. But having enough soul crystals was easier said than done. It wasn't like every monster had to drop them. Of course, although he had doubts in his mind, there was no need to doubt the power of this magic item. As expected of an item with 40 ounces of strength and above, its effects were definitely not discounted at all. Brando swung his hand from top to bottom. A sharp sword made of light suddenly appeared behind him. The sword was as tall as 2 people and as wide as 1 person. The guard was a golden cross. And a pair of wings spread out from both sides of the sword guard. From afar, it looked as if Brando had a pair of snow-white wings on his back. Romaine was stunned for a moment, taking in the scene from below. Her eyes were immediately filled with worship and excitement. Brando was so handsome. Freya was also stunned, but at least she remembered her mission. Gritting her teeth, she grabbed onto the rock and continued to climb up. The wound on her hand from last night seemed to have broken again, and the stinging pain made her frown. And Brando felt his own status. The holy sword cleared away the 2 negative statuses on him as soon as it appeared. The rotting poison and paralyzing poison disappeared instantly like snow melting away, and he could feel the power of the holy light overflowing in his body as he raised his hand. 40 ounces, level 2 strength, this was at least the standard of a cleric. In other words, after entering the state of the holy sword, Brando was no different from an official cleric in terms of dispelling. If one didn't look at his clothes and resume, at that moment, anyone would think that Brando was a cleric just by sensing his aura. It was really strange that a card summoned from the earth elemental could actually simulate the power of the light elemental so realistically. He couldn't help but wonder who made this card. But what Brando didn't know was that under his suddenly strengthened aura, the demonic tree in front of him was already a little restless. An adult golden demonic tree's offspring was only level 22, and 40 ounces of power was close to level 30. Under the threat of such a strong aura, it was difficult for a creature that wasn't very smart to control the panic in its heart. It screamed, and finally couldn't help but launch an attack. The vine-wrapped monster's body suddenly expanded, and all the vines on it flew towards Brando to stab him. Brando, be careful. Romain warned from below. Brendel furrowed his brows. Because he didn't have an elemental pool, he didn't know how much earth elemental he could withdraw. But generally speaking, the conversion of soul crystals to elemental pool was 1-to-1, so according to the remaining energy, there should be 20 earth elemental points in this card. Summoning the Holy Sword used 6 earth elemental points, so there should be 14 earth elemental points left. This calculation was still considered generous, so he swiped his right hand forward and paid 1 earth elemental point to use the Holy Sword's attack skill. It was like a golden blade shooting out from between his 5 fingers. Wherever the light passed, the vines were burned into ashes. This was the Holy Sword technique. Brando immediately recognized it. This was a low-level priest's attack spell, but after the power level was increased, its attack power was just as terrifying. The demonic tree howled and retreated. Brando's attack almost swept away 1/3 of its vines. The demonic tree relied on the golden demonic tree to provide magic sustenance, and it was these vines that needed many years to slowly grow back. But our hero did not give it a chance. He attacked from left and right, consecutively piercing the adult demonic tree's body with 3 golden swords, and then chopped down with his hand. With a loud bang, the golden demonic tree's offspring exploded from the center of its body, turning into ashes. At the same time, Freya also activated the Ring of the Wind Empress. Her attack was slightly off target, but with the power of the wind bullet, she was able to send the huge rock flying. Accompanied by a loud rumbling sound, the huge rock the size of a small mountain rolled down. Wherever it passed, whether it was the sharp rocks or the demonic trees, they were all turned into dust. In an instant, more than 10 demonic trees died at the same time. Even the golden demonic tree could not bear such a loss. It let out a terrifying howl, and the sound almost penetrated the entire Seville Valley. But Brando had heard this howl 800 times in the game, if not 1,000 times, so he was already used to it. Hearing it now made him feel nostalgic. On the other hand, Freya and Roman were shocked and looked at each other. What is that, Brando?" the ponytailed girl asked from the top of the mountain. "Don't worry, we won't interact with it." Finally, the battle was over, and Brando was relieved. After this patrol team was dealt with, the rest was much easier. He estimated the time, and the Holy Sword could be maintained for another hour and a half. This amount of time was not enough for them to walk out of the valley. And if he dispelled the Holy Sword now, he might be able to summon it again. Thinking of this, he decisively kept the card. At this time, Romain was gasping for breath as she climbed up from below. She asked, "Brendel, just now, what was that?" "It was the power of that card. I didn't expect it to be a magical item." He saw a bunch of stars in Roman's eyes, and answered ambiguously. "Magical item." Freya heard this answer and was secretly shocked. The ring that Brando gave her was also a magical item, and so was the half-plate of the Wind Empress. But how could a normal person know so much about magic? In her eyes, magic was mysterious, as if it was a legend that only existed in stories. She could not help but take a closer look at the young man below, as if she wanted to see through his true identity. He said that he was Braggs's militia, but now Freya felt more and more that this was definitely perfunctory. But what she did not expect was that at this moment, in a world that she could not see, an even more spectacular scene was happening. Because Brando raised his head, and saw a mountain of golden light flying towards him. Killing monsters that were above his level was really a good thing. Chapter 42. 420 EXP. The golden light converged into a small stream in the air and flowed into Brendel's body. Looking at the messy battlefield, he couldn't help but lean against a rock and sit down. That was a level 22 monster. Even if he was a civilian, he was only level 6. Even in the game, he wouldn't dare to be so careless to kill a monster that was 14 levels higher than him. But due to the pressure of survival, he had no choice but to do so. His original plan was to lure the adult rotten beast under the rock and wait for Freya to attack before finding an opportunity to escape. This opportunity was too difficult to grasp. If it was in the game, not many people would dare to do so. After all, it was still a level of EXP. When he made the decision, he didn't feel anything, but now that he thought about it, he felt a burst of fear and his back was cold. His last bit of confidence supported him to answer Freya and Roman calmly on the surface so that they wouldn't be too worried. But in fact, only Brando himself knew the situation he was in. He felt that this was simply overdrafting his courage. But unknowingly, people also grew up in this kind of extreme environment. Not only him, but Freya was also the same. If it was a few days ago, she was just a civilian, but now she had made her own decision. He slowly calmed himself down. The battle in the canyon was a rare harvest for him. For 20 EXP was too important for him at the moment. It was equivalent to sending charcoal in the snow. The most important thing was to increase his strength. Mercenaries needed 70 EXP to reach level 4, 130 EXP at level 5, 220 EXP at level 6, and according to the settings, a second profession skill would be unlocked after level 5. Mercenary level 4, 0, 3 strength, 0, 2 vitality, 0, 2 dexterity, 0, 1 wisdom. Mercenary level 5, 0, 3 strength, 0, 3 vitality, 0, 2 dexterity, 0, 1 will. Mercenary level 6, 0, 4 strength, 0, 3 vitality, 0, 2 dexterity, 0, 2 wisdom. When he leveled up, rows of data that indicated the changes in his attributes were projected onto his retina. When he was a level 3 mercenary, his attributes were strength 2, 5, dexterity 2, 3, and vitality 2. 4. When he reached level 6, his attributes were strength 3, 5, dexterity 2, 9, and vitality 3. 2. This meant that his vitality was 3 times that of a normal person, and his strength was more than 25 times. Relying purely on strength and ignoring his experience, Brando could easily defeat the entire Butchie militia. With the bonus of experience points, even if it was the same number of guards, they wouldn't have an easy time against him. This was the power of level 1. Even the vice-captain of Butchie's garrison, Breton, could only barely reach the strength of a rank 1 on a warhorse. Even so, the veteran Martin still thought that he was a genius. After all, Breton was only 20 years old. With his youth and talent, he might one day become a Lily Knight. In a sense, he could be considered a pillar of the kingdom. At this moment, Brando was 1 year younger than him. If the original Brando was here, he would not believe that he could reach this step in just 3 days. Out of 10 people, half of them would never be able to break through to level 1 from the strength of an ordinary person. As for those who completed it before the age of 20, only 10 to 20% of them completed it. However, Brando knew that this was not enough. Among the newborns that were baptized by the Holy Cathedral of Fire every year, he knew that many of them were born with level 1 strength. They were the so-called natural aristocrats, the revelators. Moreover, there were also rare people who were born with level 2 strength. They were the so-called chosen ones. As for those who had the talent of a knight, players were also included in this category. There were even more of them. This was a world that worshipped strength. Brando understood that if he wanted to stand out, he had to use his advantage as well. What was his advantage? It was the strength that was given to him by another world. After level 5, a mercenary's skill would be Strength Burst. In the next action, they would consume 3 times their stamina and gain 1 OZ level of strength. This was the most important skill for a mercenary in the early stages. Brando would not be stingy with it. Now that he had 150 experience points, even if he trained this skill to level 6, he would only need to use a third of it, 55 experience points. After level 6, this skill would instantly increase one's strength by 4 ounce levels, almost reaching the mid-stage of level 1 strength. The remaining skill points would naturally be used to improve his military swordsmanship and combat skills. He also used the remaining 6 experience points on the militia, allowing it to advance to level 3. This way, his strength and vitality would both increase by 0.2 ounce levels. This was the reason why so many people in the game chose to take up a profession despite the experience points penalty. It was because the experience points gained from taking up a profession in the early stages was much higher than taking up a profession. Of course, Brando thought so too. However, there was a limit to everything. Those who took up a profession in the past did pay a price. After all, after entering level 3 strength and elemental activation, the profession's adjustments were not as obvious. His total level was 10. Brando couldn't help but close his eyes and let out a long sigh. Now, the rotten beast was just giving him experience points. If he wasn't in a hurry to send the letter to Fortress Reden, he would have wanted to farm some experience points on the outskirts of Zavale Mountain Road. At most, he would have reached level 15 in half a month. Unfortunately, time did not allow him to do so. He squinted his eyes again. The shadows of rotten beasts began to appear in the distant valley. The bush monsters were looking at him from across the valley. Of course, they didn't have vision, but the commotion from before must have alerted them. Brando quietly picked up his sword. He wasn't afraid of these things. However, it wouldn't be good to be entangled with them. The Roman ant was still in the city. They and the Madara army were racing against time to reach Fortress Reden. At this moment, he suddenly remembered the seal ring that Martin gave him. He couldn't help but take out the seal ring with the pine leaf emblem from his pocket. The young man thought of something and couldn't help but sneer. The veteran of the November War also didn't understand this point. Butchie was the most important buffer zone in the direction of Fort Reden's defensive line. Since the Year of Thunder, the central government of the kingdom had been preparing to build a complete defensive line here. However, the implementation of government orders wasn't as simple as it seemed on the surface. Due to the lack of funds, the construction of Fort Reden and Fort Reden was already the limit of this project. As for the warning system in the buffer zone, the nobles didn't even think about it. As long as Fort Reden and Fort Reden were still in their hands, they could still live a good life. As for the countryside outside, Madara didn't invade every year, right? Even though there were Freya, Breton, and Martin who fought for the kingdom, Erwin was already old, and that was another fact. The rotten upper echelons were destroying the foundation of the kingdom. Butchie was an exception, and Brando knew that there were traces of the kingdom's demise everywhere else. He couldn't help but sigh and look to the east. The sky in the east was covered by layers of dark clouds, and even the morning sun had dimmed. There was a kingdom rising in the darkness. Brando, your ring. Brando turned around and saw Freya looking at him with sparkling eyes. He couldn't help but joke, "Do I look good?" The ponytailed girl's face turned red. She turned around and saw the Roman sitting on the slope looking over with a smile. "Roman, you idiot. What did I do?" The merchant girl was stunned. Brando smiled. He obviously knew that Freya was just venting her anger on him. He put on the ring of the Wind Empress and touched the card of fate in his chest. Even though he had never seen this thing before, he knew that it was his biggest trump card. Even if it was only for 10 minutes, it was enough for him to do a lot of things. For example, killing the golden demonic tree. With the card of fate, he made a new plan. After all, the loot from the golden demonic tree was too tempting. Wealth came from danger, and the more power he had here, the more chances he would have in Fort Reden. Furthermore, killing the golden demonic tree wasn't like killing monsters, it didn't require much time. He estimated that he had around 8 hours left, which was more than enough. But before that, if he could get another soul crystal, he would have a 90% chance of success. After all, using the holy sword required an earth EP. He even considered whether or not he should open his own elemental pool. But it wasn't worth it to be an elementalist or a spellblade for a 40-ounce magic item pool. This was because it was best for the classes to be related to each other so that they could complement each other. The elementalist, spellblade, and sun knight all had their own system, and it was difficult for them to provide any help to the warrior class. In Brando's mind, he had always treated the mercenaries as warriors. After all, these two classes looked similar in the early stages, and even their skills were the same. The only thing left was the Elemental Soul, a quest that opened the elemental pool for normal people. He didn't know if there were any similar quests in this world. Of course, those were things that happened a long time ago. He didn't have time to think too much about it. There was still a long way to go from here to the Forbidden Orchard, but he could still save 2 hours if he went straight. Using 2 hours to clear out the monsters and see if he could find another elite rotten beast was Brando's goal. Thinking of this, he stood up and patted Freya's shoulder. Then he said to the two ladies, "Okay, rest is over. Let's get ready to go." Unfortunately, his action of comforting Freya out of goodwill ended up touching a part of her body that he shouldn't have touched. It felt good to the touch, and he could feel the softness and elasticity even through the layer of metal scales. The atmosphere instantly froze. Brando looked at our future goddess of war's face that was initially red hot, then white, and then black. He wanted to explain, but what awaited him was the hilt of the holy sword slashing at him. Shameless bastard. Wait, I didn't mean to, wah. P.S. Today's collection growth has stagnated again. Please vote and collect, carrot oh carrot. Chapter 43. After the fog in the forest dissipated, the battle was more or less over. The ambush launched by the young guards did bring about some unexpected results to Madara's vanguard, but when Cabias gathered more powerful undead, the outcome of the battle quickly became clear. The forest quieted down. Lord Cabias. The pale necromancer apprentice placed his hand on his chest and respectfully bowed to the tall skeleton in front of him. "I thought you maggots wouldn't come to see me, Rothko." The eyes of the skeleton general in brass armor were burning fiercely. It sat on a pile of corpses with its legs spread apart. It held its double-edged axe in one hand and pressed its other hand on its knee. It looked down at the skinny apprentice with disdain. The Dark Lords and Necromancers had always hated each other. This time, they were united under the command of the Mercury Staff, but they were divided at heart. As for the Blood Descendants, they had always maintained their own circle and rarely participated in Madara's affairs. This kingdom had been divided for centuries, and it was only recently that a smoke-like darkness broke out from the cocoon under the stable shell. This was the prophecy of the Banshees, and it also coincided with Goddess Helene's prophecy about the spreading darkness of the East. Whether it was the Dark Lords, Necromancers, or Blood Descendants, everyone believed that this era was coming to an end, and Madara was about to usher in a new era. Rothko smiled. Cabias was one of Tarkus's main generals, while he was just a small squadron leader. The difference between them was huge. The only reason this skeleton was reprimanding him was because his vanguard had stolen the limelight of the entire army. Relying on 300 skeletons and 20 necromancers to defeat Butchie's guards, and then annihilate the Green Village's self-defense regiment, allowing Cabias to march straight in. Finally, they cooperated with Cabias to annihilate Butchie's guards. Such a result could only be described as glorious. According to Madara's traditions, the vanguard of an army was usually used as cannon fodder to deplete the enemy's strength. At the worst, they were used as a buffer to delay time. This vanguard was made up of skeleton soldiers and low-level liches. Erwin's side only needed a third of this size to defeat them easily. In Tarkus's plan, Hrothgar was merely a chess piece used to disrupt his plans. The true vanguard was Cabias and Ghoul Weezer. However, the one-eyed vampire commander did not expect that this apprentice necromancer named Hrothgar would give him such a huge surprise. It was just like how he didn't expect Ghoul Weezer to make such a huge mistake on the right flank. The battlefield was always full of variables, and even an excellent commander could not take the lead at every step, not to mention that Tarkus was famous for his steadiness. However, this lowly apprentice necromancer still didn't know what his future path was. Naturally, he wouldn't retort. On the contrary, Cabia's words were more like an honor to him. After all, Cabias was targeting all necromancers, and it was indirectly raising his status. He glanced at the row of warriors of darkness behind Cabias and felt a little envious. He had looted a lot of good stuff during the invasion, but most of it had to be handed over. What was left was not enough to summon a single warrior of darkness. He heard that there was a tomb of a Templar knight in the Green Village. That was the best vessel, but it was now Cabias's territory. It was a pity, but forget it. There would be plenty of opportunities in the future. This time, Madara came to reap some benefits, and all the generals saw this as an opportunity. He thought for a moment and replied, "Lord Cabias, a few rats escaped the net and fled to the north. We also didn't see the refugees yesterday afternoon. I suspect that they are creating a diversion, and their main force has already entered the River of Daggers." That was enough for him. The north was controlled by Ghoul Weezer. If he wanted to chase those living materials back, or at least get a share of the loot, he would need the approval of this god of death. He was just a small captain, and he couldn't bear this responsibility. But Cabias was no fool. It glanced at the little undead sorcerer's apprentice and suddenly realized that this guy's motives were not pure. It couldn't help but adjust its jaw and make a cracking sound. "You want me to go and fight with that baldy Weezer? What benefits can I get from that?" "Small maggots. You can further expand your strength." "Isn't that enough, my lord?" "Humph, they are just a bunch of mobs. I have no interest in those weak skeletons. I heard that there is a veteran of the November War in Butchie's garrison. He is the captain of those humans." Cabias's eyes flashed. The gains do not make up for the losses. That brat Weezer has it easy. Hrothgar sighed, knowing that he had failed to persuade Cabias. He raised his head and was about to leave. After all, he and Cabias weren't people of the same system. If not for this matter, he wouldn't have come. Although Cabias was the commander of the army, he was a member of the undead wizards. His vanguard didn't have to listen to his orders. But at this moment, his heart trembled slightly, and he couldn't help but look towards the south. The tall skeletons also looked in that direction. Their line of sight passed through the forest and landed in the shadows of the mountains. What a strong magic reaction. It's the Savale mountain path. Cabias sniffed the air, as if it could smell the magic coming from the direction of the Song River. Hrothgar didn't answer, because he immediately felt an even stronger magic wave coming from that direction. What was that golden demonic tree up to? Such a strong reaction could be felt by any wizard tens of miles away. He suddenly felt a little worried. He didn't know if the White Mane warlocks in the direction of Fortress Reedon would notice anything. "It's best if we send some people out first, Lord Cabias." "Humph, you don't have to tell me. Us undead creatures are much more sensitive to magic than you. Wait until you become a lich, then you can teach me a lesson." Hrothgar laughed. Brando brought Freya and Roman out from a crack in the cliff. He immediately gestured for them to stop. From here, they could see the entire valley outside. In the middle of the barren mountains, there were gray rocks that were sunken downwards, and sharp stalagmites protruded out of the ground. A huge golden oak tree was quietly rooted in the middle of the valley. This was the Forbidden Orchard. The golden demonic tree had absorbed the nutrients and magic elements from the earth, causing the earth to wither. The earth elements that had lost their adhesion to the ground rose into the air, resulting in such a scene. Brando raised his head. The sky above the valley was gloomy, as if dark clouds were pressing down on them. This was also caused by the imbalance of the elements. Because of the disintegration of the earth elements, it attracted a large amount of other elements to gather here, causing the elemental order to be abnormally chaotic. The elemental order was a rule set by Marcia when she created the world. It was controlled by the 4 elven kings, but the order wasn't necessarily stable and unchanging. Just like what the golden demonic tree did, human factors often disturbed the environment. In the past, because of the abnormality of the elements in this valley, the power of the elementalists was suppressed by 30%. Because of this reason, almost no team in this dungeon would accept the elementalists. This period of history was called the 3 Years of Blood and Tears by the elementalists. Of course, later on, this class suddenly became a force to be reckoned with. Roman and Freya stared at the golden demonic tree in a daze. They had only heard of such a creature in bedtime stories. They did not expect to see it with their own eyes one day. For a moment, they even suspected that they were dreaming. Moreover, the beauty of the golden demonic tree and the surrounding desolation presented a strong visual conflict. It was as if they were looking at a realistic fantasy, full of fantasy. What is that? Freya could not help but ask in a daze. It's so beautiful, Brando. Is that the golden apple tree in the fairy tales? Those monsters are the guards of this tree, right? I didn't expect such a beautiful creature to exist in such an environment. That is an oak tree, Roman. The future Valkyrie sighed. Of course I know it. It's just a golden oak tree. Romaine raised her eyebrows and hurriedly explained. Don't be fooled by its beauty. This should be the most dangerous creature you have ever seen. No, it should be a monster. Brando's eyes carefully scanned the entire valley. He quickly found a patrol of demonic trees. Those monsters were covered in vines and were slowly moving along the rugged rocky surface. This matched his memory from the game. Monsters. Yes, the monsters we encountered before were all born because of it. How? Freya could not help but widen her eyes in shock. In fact, she and Roman had also seen this patrol of demonic trees. However, they were not too nervous when facing these monsters. Along the way, the 3 of them had already dealt with these golden demonic trees too many times. Brando earned 65 EXP and even obtained a tree crystal from an adult demonic tree. This thing was a crafting material in the game. He did not know how the crafting skills in this world were calculated. In short, he carried it with him as a precaution. However, he noticed that Freya and Roman had also grown significantly during the battle. Especially the future Valkyrie, her strength and agility had increased very quickly. After a few battles, she was almost at the level of a guard student. However, Brando still did not know how they gained EXP. On the surface, it seemed that they were much slower than him. This was because for high-level monsters like the demonic trees, by right, killing a few of Freya's militia should have leveled up a few times. However, in reality, he felt that it was not as fast as his second profession as a mercenary. This made him a little puzzled. Of course, at this moment, he had to put aside all his doubts because they had more important things to do. If they waited for the golden demonic tree to discover them and call back the rotten beasts outside, they would not have much time left. Brando had calculated in the game before. From the start of the battle to the arrival of the first batch of rotten beasts, there was a maximum of 15 minutes, which was the duration of the Holy Sword's existence. If they could not kill the golden demonic tree before then, they would have to consider escaping. However, Brando did not consider immediately going up to fight. First of all, not to mention how to deal with the patrol of demonic trees, he had another question to answer. Thinking of this, he could not help but look at a higher cliff on the other side. You guys wait for me here. Do not be discovered. He turned around and said. Brando. P.S. Go 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 go. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.